Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. You're welcome back to the G Hall, and you're kindly requested to take your seats. The 33rd plenary meeting of the General Assembly is called to order. Before proceeding further, I would like to remind members that all meeting participants are encouraged to consider wearing a mask while indoors, including in the General Assembly Hall and in conference rooms. The General Assembly will consider agenda item 34, entitled, I quote, "The Situation in Afghanistan," end of quote. In connection with the item, the Assembly has before it a report of the Secretary General circulated in document A/77/340, as well as a draft resolution circulated in document A/77L11. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Afghanistan is in crisis. It is in many crises. It has been 15 months since the Taliban consolidated control over the country. Its economy is in ruins. The humanitarian situation is disastrous. 2/3 of the population is hungry. Girls and women are banned from learning, having a job, or getting proper medical care. The country is awash with heroin and opium. Organized crime and terrorist organizations are thriving once again. Afghanistan is facing complex and interlinked challenges that the Taliban have shown they cannot or they would not solve. It is time to support the Afghan people with concrete solutions that place their needs front and center. It is true that some problems will require some time to resolve, but there are actions the Assembly can take to change the paradigm now. I would like you to consider one solution through solidarity. The UN humanitarian appeal for Afghanistan, which requires $4.4 billion, is only half funded. With winter weather just weeks away, I encourage member states to provide urgent support to help reduce the $2.3 billion shortfall. Let's remind ourselves of the old saying from Afghanistan: "A real friend is one who takes the hand of his friend in times of distress and helplessness." Excellencies, Afghanistan has a rich history of scientific achievement. I encourage the country's re-engagement with the international science community and to allow women who used to be respected members of the country's science community to resume their research and their studies. Afghanistan is now the only state in the world that would deny girls their full right to education. The prospect of girls' education has been left to uncertainty amid seemingly random edicts from the Taliban. This time, last year, Fawzia Kofi, the first woman deputy speaker of the Afghan parliament, recalled her dream of one day addressing the UN as the president of Afghanistan. She said, "With me, millions of girls and women in Afghanistan had this dream that now they think will never come true." Dreams of becoming a president have been replaced by a reality of child marriage. Arrests of women and girls leave their home without a male chaperone. I reiterate my call for the protection of fundamental rights and freedom of all Afghans, especially women and girls. Similarly, I urge the Taliban to ensure the safety of all Afghans, regardless of gender, ethnic background, religious belief, or political affiliation, to protect journalists and civil society members, to allow unhindered humanitarian aid, and to cooperate with humanitarian workers. We expect the Taliban to make good on their commitments they made to the international community, to show honesty through concrete action. Excellencies, the dramatic changes of 2021 have taken a massive toll on Afghanistan's economy and profoundly widened many security risks. Narcotics now make up the country's largest economic sector. Earlier this month, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime reported that opium cultivation in 2022 increased by 32%. Prices have soared. We know where these drugs are sent, and we know who profits from these drugs. The threat from drug trafficking is linked with the threat of terrorism, regional and global insecurity. The Haqqani network and Al-Qaeda are just some of the terrorist organizations active in Afghanistan. It is crucial that Taliban leaders engage in a serious counter-terrorism dialogue to stop and reverse the flow of foreign extremists into the country and prevent their own from becoming foreign terrorist fighters in other countries. Afghanistan must never again become a breeding ground and safe haven for terrorism. Dear friends, there is a moral and also a practical imperative for the international community to support an inclusive and sustainable peace in Afghanistan. I call on the Taliban, other Afghans, and members of the international community to cooperate with the special representative as she implements the mission's mandate. I welcome the appointment of Rosa Otunbayeva as the new head of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan. I commend dialogue and mediation initiatives like the Tashkent format. After almost 5 decades of relentless conflict, we need continued and concrete efforts for the peaceful rebuilding of Afghanistan. Thank you. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany to introduce draft resolution A/77/L11.
Mr. President, 15 months after the forceful takeover of the Taliban, the situation in Afghanistan remains of greatest concern. We witness a massive economic contraction and humanitarian crisis. Half the population is subject to critical levels of food insecurity. We expect a harsh winter and levels of needs that we have not seen in the last decades, with little prospect for economic recovery and reduction of poverty. Mr. President, widespread and systemic denial of fundamental human rights by the Taliban is the reality of Afghanistan and its people. The systematic oppression of women and girls who cannot enjoy their civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights is extremely worrying. There is an absence of any effort towards inclusive governance and a sustainable long-term political solution to govern the country. We have also not seen any effort from the Taliban towards the full enjoyment by women and girls and persons belonging to minorities of their human rights. Security remains fragile. The decrease of conflict-related security incidents contrasts with ongoing fighting in the country and an increasing number of terrorist attacks on schools, public transport, places of worship, and diplomatic premises. Mr. President, the Taliban control the country, but do not live up to their responsibility towards the Afghan people. They do not respond to the needs of the Afghan population. This makes a coherent international response all the more important. The resolution in front of you, which we would aim to adopt by consensus, sends a strong signal of support to the Afghan people. It is a reminder of the expectations of the international community towards the Taliban, which the Security Council has formulated with its Resolution 2593 in August 2021. The resolution before us is a clear call to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights, develop inclusive governance, and fight terrorism. It contains a clear message that there cannot be business as usual and no pathway towards recognition without these steps being made. Engagement with the Taliban will have to remain limited in steps and scope based on principles. The resolution is testimony to our joint commitment to assist the Afghan people who rely on us while being neglected by their rulers. Germany remains engaged. Since August 2021, we have provided more than €1 billion for humanitarian assistance and support to basic needs for the Afghan people and in support of Afghanistan's neighbors. The resolution before us is testimony to our support for the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan. It fully endorses the renewal of UNAMA's mandate in March of this year. And the resolution is also testimony to our common long-term aspiration to stabilize Afghanistan. Finally, the resolution expresses the concerns we all share together with the neighbors of Afghanistan regarding the dangers of a spillover of instability, irregular migration flows, radicalization and terrorism, organized crime, and drug trafficking. It clearly formulates appreciation and support for the efforts of countries in the region to support Afghanistan and its people. Mr. President, Germany is the traditional facilitator of the General Assembly's resolution on the situation in Afghanistan. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all co-sponsors of this resolution for their invaluable support. This year's draft resolution is the product of a comprehensive negotiation process, taking a step back after the events of last summer and including a sizable core group inviting neighboring countries and those countries carrying a heavy burden over the last 15 months. It contains our collective political understanding and is recommended for adoption by consensus. I thank you all.
I thank the distinguished representative of Germany. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Afghanistan.
Mr. President, thank you for convening this meeting to adopt the resolution on the situation in Afghanistan. Let me begin by expressing the gratitude and deep appreciation of the people of Afghanistan to the permanent mission of Germany as a traditional facilitator of this resolution, particularly Ambassador Anne J. Lindartis, Councillor Michael Hassanow, and his team for their leadership, hard work, and capable facilitation of this resolution. Germany has been one of the great supporters of the Afghan people, also a genuine partner and an ally in supporting international efforts to ensure peace, security, and prosperity in Afghanistan. I also wish to extend my appreciation to all other countries who participated in the discussions, demonstrated flexibility, and supported this resolution through their contributions and sponsorship. Mr. President, since the last time that this resolution was adopted in December 2019 by the General Assembly, unfortunately, Afghanistan has gone through quite dramatic and tragic social, economic, and political upheavals. The forced takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban on 15 August 2021 has further exacerbated the already deteriorating socio-economic, and humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. Since then, we have been witnessing an increasing social, economic, and humanitarian crisis, including a total collapse and regression of 2 decades of hard-won gains. The Taliban's failure to establish a legitimate, accountable, and inclusive system and unwillingness to address these crises to put Afghanistan back on the road to recovery has deeply affected the lives of the people of Afghanistan, particularly women and girls. This has further isolated Afghanistan from the international community. All reports warn of growing concerns regarding the precarious situation in Afghanistan, where 24.4 million people is currently in need of humanitarian assistance. The country is also facing multiple threats, including increasing terrorist attacks on civilian targets, including particular minority groups such as Shia, Hazara, Hindus, Sufis, Sikhs. 32% increase in opium cultivation this year, systematic erasure of women and girls from all areas of public life, continued violations and abuses of human rights, including arbitrary arrest, extrajudicial killings of former security forces, journalists, human rights defenders, and protesters, as well as collective punishment and forced displacements of particular ethnic groups. Mr. President, there are deep concerns about the growing security threats emanating from the presence of terrorist groups in Afghanistan. The people of Afghanistan, including women, girls, and minority communities, are not safe in places for education and worship. Afghan people have been the recurring victims of terror attacks, and we have lost many lives in the fight against terrorism. The threat of terrorism requires collective effort addressed through the genuine cooperation from all actors and conducted through a capable, legitimate, and trusted government. Mr. President, the draft resolution reflected in an objective and balanced way the overall current social, economic, security, and political situation in Afghanistan and its impacts on the countries in the region and beyond, including threats, challenges, problems, and solutions, and has called for immediate action by all stakeholders. We appreciate that the resolution highlights the most pressing issues, including the humanitarian crisis, by urging the international community to provide humanitarian assistance through supporting the 2022 Afghan Humanitarian Response Plan. We are grateful to the donor and pledging countries for providing support and funding. Mr. President, in the same token, we also appreciate that the resolution has highlighted the human rights situation and its serious concern for the situation of women, youth, and minorities. The ongoing human rights violations and growing repression of fundamental freedoms of all Afghans, including women and girls, human rights activists, and journalists by the Taliban in Afghanistan is factual, as reflected in the reports of a Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan and the UN Secretary General. Deprivation of women and girls from their fundamental human rights and freedoms, including the right to work and education, has deeply impacted the lives of half of the society and the economy. The women and girls situation in Afghanistan must not be overlooked, and their rights should not be compromised. All girls and boys should have access to equal and quality education at all levels. The resolution also calls for action to address the problems of Afghan refugees, which desperately need support and assistance. Mr. President, we are grateful to the constructive engagement of all member states despite their differences of views. The most important issue for Afghan people is the implementation of this and other United Nations resolutions on the situation in Afghanistan, particularly the section that emphasizes the establishment of an inclusive and representative system upholding human rights, including for women, girls, children, and minorities by the Taliban. I would like to reiterate that without an inclusive, representative, participatory, and responsive government at the national and subnational level with full, equal, and meaningful participation of women, we cannot achieve a sustainable, lasting peace, economic, and political stability in Afghanistan. The Taliban should respond to the calls by the Afghan people and international partners to fulfill their commitments through the establishment of an inclusive and accountable system, as well as upholding the human rights of fundamental freedoms of all Afghans. The people of Afghanistan have been suffering from protracted conflict, poverty, starvation, food insecurity, unemployment, and migration. They deserve a peaceful, decent, and dignified life. The people of Afghanistan desperately need the support and solidarity of all international partners, particularly the United Nations, in achieving their long-awaited aspirations for enduring peace, stability, and prosperity. Adoption of this resolution by consensus must happen at this crucial juncture to protect the needs of Afghan people and ensure that their struggle is not forgotten. This resolution will create hope and optimism for the people of Afghanistan who are faced with a dire humanitarian and economic situation. By adoption of this resolution today, the UN General Assembly and the member states will reaffirm their commitments and continued support to the people of Afghanistan. Mr. President, in conclusion, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all countries for their sustained support to the people of Afghanistan so far. Your support in this resolution will reflect a strong message that the UN and its member states will continue supporting the people of Afghanistan in their quest to achieve enduring peace, stability, and prosperity through their collective efforts. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Afghanistan. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union.
Mr. President, good morning, colleagues. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the EU and its 27 member states, as well as the candidate countries Montenegro, Serbia, Albania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, the country of the Stabilization and Association Process and potential candidate Bosnia-Herzegovina, as well as Andorra and Monaco, aligned themselves with this statement. Let me start by thanking all the delegations that have participated constructively in the consultations on the resolution text, and of course particularly Germany and the German team for facilitating the negotiations. International unity in the approach to the challenges in Afghanistan is very important for the Afghan people, and we hope that the resolution will be adopted by consensus today. The EU reiterates our support for the work of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan and welcome its efforts thus far. The UN remains an indispensable partner and a key actor on the ground. The efforts and reports from the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan, Richard Bennett, are also greatly appreciated. Mr. President, we want to reaffirm that the EU and its member states will stand with the Afghan people and that we remain committed to stability, prosperity, and sustainable peace in Afghanistan and in the broader region. This will require an inclusive political process with full, equal, and meaningful participation of all Afghans, including all ethnic groups and religious minorities, and the meaningful participation of women in decision-making positions. The EU and its member states in that regard welcome Security Council Resolution 2593, which encourages such an inclusive, negotiated political settlement and sends a clear, strong, and united message on the international community's expectations and demands that must be transformed into concrete actions. We advocate for the protection and the fulfillment of human rights and fundamental freedoms in accordance with international conventions to which Afghanistan, as a state party, should adhere, while respecting international humanitarian law. the EU remains deeply alarmed by the increase of human rights violations and abuse in Afghanistan. Accountability must be ensured, and in this regard we recall that Afghanistan is a party to the Rome Statute. Mr. President, as you said, and as the representative of Afghanistan just set out in detail here, the human rights situation of women and girls continues to deteriorate. The EU reiterates a strong, unwavering commitment to the full, equal and meaningful participation of all women and girls in all spheres of life in Afghanistan, as well as to their protection from all forms of discrimination and violence. Nowhere else are girls banned from attending secondary education. This is unacceptable and must be revoked immediately. Furthermore, persons belonging to ethnic groups and religious minorities, notably Hazaras and the Shia population, LGBTI persons, human rights defenders, journalists, and other media workers suffer physical abuse, arbitrary detentions, enforced disappearances, torture, and even killings. This is unacceptable. The shrinking space for civil society and media, restrictions on human rights and fundamental freedoms remain primary concerns. Afghanistan faces also a deep humanitarian and economic crisis. The situation is expected to deteriorate further during the upcoming winter. In the absence of a legitimate and recognized Afghan government, the EU has been working tirelessly with the international community to find principled, pragmatic and creative solutions to support the Afghan people and mitigate the grave humanitarian and economic crisis. We've committed over 300 million euros in humanitarian aid, and we've mobilized 330 million euros to maintain basic services and sustain livelihoods delivered through UN partners and local and international organizations and NGOs, all of to whom we are entirely grateful. The EU intends to continue its support to the Afghan people in close coordination with international partners. We have established a minimal presence in Kabul, ensuring the delivery of assistance, facilitating operational coordination, and representing EU policies and positions. The EU prioritizes direct engagement with the Afghan people, including through the Afghan Women's Leaders Forum, which aims to ensure that Afghan women have a voice in international fora. Mr. President, allowing the implementation of humanitarian operations in Afghanistan in line with the humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality and independence and full respect of international humanitarian law is key. The Taliban must respect the independence of humanitarian operations and guarantee for all humanitarian staff, including female staff, the safe and unhindered access to the entire territory. Safety of beneficiaries of humanitarian aid must be ascertained, and all of them must have free and unhindered access to aid services. We expect that all foreign nationals and Afghans who want to leave the country are allowed a safe, secure and orderly departure in line with Security Council Resolution 2593 in the full respect of the freedom of movement. An unstable Afghanistan will continue to threaten and destabilize its neighbors, the wider region and beyond. Illicit drug trafficking and terrorism do not respect international borders. The EU underlines the importance to prevent Afghanistan from serving as a base for hosting, financing or exporting terrorism to other countries. All efforts must be pursued to ensure that the Taliban cease all direct or indirect ties with international terrorism. We are greatly concerned about the continued presence of terrorist organizations in Afghanistan, including Al-Qaeda and ISIL-KP. We maintain contact with the Taliban in order to allow for dialogue on the political priorities of the European Union, ensure that the EU can provide support to the Afghan people, and to raise the key issues related to the 5 benchmarks defined by the EU's foreign ministers. The EU engagement with the Taliban is not an international legitimization of the Taliban's self-appointed interim government and is carefully calibrated to the policies and actions of the Taliban. To conclude, Mr. President, we believe that the resolution we will adopt today is an important reflection of our collective political understanding of the present situation, of what is required to improve the plight of the people, not least for women and girls, on our clear demands and expectations on the Taliban, and on our own commitment and solidarity as long-term partners to the people of Afghanistan. I thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia.
سيد الرئيس، السيدات والسادة، أتشرف بأن أدلي بهذا البيان باسم دول مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية، الإمارات العربية المتحدة، ومملكة البحرين، سلطنة عمان، ودولة قطر، ودولة الكويت، وبلاد المملكة العربية السعودية، في إطار مناقشة البند 34 من جدول أعمال الدورة 77 للجمعية العامة المعنون الحالة في أفغانستان. وإذ نشكركم السيد الرئيس على عقدكم لهذه الجلسة لمناقشة تطورات الحالة في أفغانستان، لا تفوتنا الفرصة أن نتقدم بالشكر أيضاً إلى جميع البعثات التي شاركت في المشاورات بشأن مشروع القرار، ونخص البعثة الدائمة لجمهورية ألمانيا الاتحادية لقيادتها عملية التفاوض، مع التأكيد على أننا كنا نأمل أن يولي القرار الأهمية المناسبة لمساعدة أفغانستان بدعم سبل الاستقرار السياسي، وكذلك فيما يتعلق بالجوانب الأمنية ومكافحة الإرهاب والمخدرات بالقدر الكافي، لما لذلك من أهمية بالغة لتحقيق الرؤى التنموية الشاملة التي يجب أن يراعى فيها خصوصية الشعب الأفغاني، معبرين عن أملنا في أن يتمكن المجتمع الدولي من توجيه رسالة تضامن ودعم للشعب الأفغاني. وفي هذا الصدد تعرب دول المجلس عن قلقها البالغ إزاء استمرار تفاقم الأوضاع الإنسانية في أفغانستان في ظل عدم قدرة الاقتصاد الأفغاني على تأدية وظائفه الأساسية، فضلاً عن الحد من حريات وحقوق النساء والفتيات، وكذلك خطر تصاعد تهديدات الإرهاب. السيد الرئيس، لقد دأبت دول مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية على السعي دوماً لدعم كل ما من شأنه تحقيق الأمن والسلام والاستقرار على الصعيدين الإقليمي والدولي، وإلى مد يد العون حيثما دعت الحاجة إلى ذلك. واستمراراً لهذا النهج، ساندت دول مجلس التعاون كافة المساعي الهادفة إلى إعادة الأمن والاستقرار في أفغانستان. وتؤكد دول المجلس على الروابط الدينية والثقافية المشتركة بين الشعبين الشقيقين الخليجي والأفغاني، وكذلك على الأهمية التي تحتلها أفغانستان ومكانتها ودورها البارز في هذه المنطقة الحيوية من العالم، كما تؤكد على أن بناء أفغانستان آمنة ومستقرة أمر لا غنى عنه لتحقيق السلام والاستقرار في المنطقة والعالم. وللوصول إلى هذه الغاية ولضمان عدم تقويض الجهود الدولية بهذا الصدد، تشدد دول المجلس على عدم تحول أفغانستان إلى منطلق للعمليات الإرهابية أو مقر للإرهابيين أو استغلال أراضيها لتصدير المخدرات، مما يزعزع استقرار المنطقة والعالم. كما تؤكد دول المجلس على استنكارها الشديد ورفضها الدائم لجميع أشكال العنف التي تهدف إلى زعزعة الأمن وتتنافى مع كافة الأديان والقيم والمبادئ الإنسانية. كما تؤكد دول المجلس على استقلال وسيادة أفغانستان ووحدة أراضيه وأهمية استعادة الأمن والاستقرار بما يحقق آمال وتطلعات الشعب الأفغاني الشقيق ويعود بالنفع على الأمن والسلم الإقليمي والدولي. السيد الرئيس، استمراراً للجهود الكبيرة التي بذلتها ولا زالت تبذلها دول المجلس في إطار دعمها للشعب الأفغاني، فقد دعمت كل الجهود المبذولة لتحقيق الأمن والسلام والازدهار في أفغانستان، بما في ذلك عبر المساعي الحثيثة لدولة قطر الشقيقة لدعم عملية السلام في أفغانستان منذ عام 2020، سعياً لإيجاد سبل سلمية لتحقيق التسوية السياسية الشاملة في أفغانستان. كما تستمر دول مجلس التعاون بتعاونها المثمر مع المنظمات الدولية الفاعلة بالشأن الأفغاني، وقد ترجمت تعاونها مع منظمة التعاون الإسلامي عن طريق دعمها لمخرجات المنظمة ذات الصلة، حيث دعمت الصندوق الاستئماني الإنساني لأفغانستان بالتعاون مع البنك الإسلامي للتنمية. وعلى الصعيد الإنساني ساهمت دول المجلس بدعم البرامج الإنمائية والإنسانية في أفغانستان، لا سيما الجهود المتعلقة بمسائل الإجلاء. وختاماً، السيد الرئيس، أيها السيدات والسادة، تدعو دول مجلس التعاون المجتمع الدولي إلى عدم التخلي عن الشعب الأفغاني ومساعدته على تحقيق تطلعاته نحو إقامة أفغانستان حرة آمنة مستقرة ومتصالحة مع جوارها. وستظل دول مجلس التعاون ملتزمة بدعم الجهود السياسية والإنسانية والتنموية على الصعيدين الإقليمي والدولي لتجاوز حالة الجمود السياسي وبناء مستقبل أكثر استقراراً وازدهاراً لأفغانستان. كما تثمن كل الجهود المبذولة من الدول الأعضاء كافة وبعثة الأمم المتحدة لمساعدة أفغانستان، وتؤكد على أهمية توحيد جميع الجهود نحو العمل المشترك لمعالجة التحديات في أفغانستان، لا سيما وأن استقرار وازدهار أفغانستان هو جزء من استقرار وازدهار المنطقة والعالم أجمع. وشكرا السيد الرئيس.
أنا أشكر سعادة السفير العربية السعودية المحترم. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Finland.
Mr. President, colleagues, I'm pleased to deliver this statement on behalf of the Nordic countries, Denmark, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and my own country, Finland. First, I would like to warmly thank Germany for bringing the negotiations on this key resolution to a conclusion. We, the Nordic countries, have co-sponsored the draft resolution at hand. We remain deeply concerned about the developments in Afghanistan. It is essential that the international community continue to pay sustained attention to the situation and developments on the ground. The Nordic countries' commitment to the Afghan people remain steadfast. UNAMA's presence in Afghanistan is vital. We appreciate UNAMA's work in the new reality facing Afghanistan, and we want to reaffirm our unswerving support for the continuation of the mandate and the work of UNAMA, including its strong human rights mandate on which Norway has led negotiations in the Security Council. Let me express our appreciation for the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Madam Rosa Otunbayeva, and wish her the best of success with her demanding work ahead. Let me also express our gratitude and appreciation to the Special Rapporteur, Richard Bennett, whose work on human rights is invaluable. The human rights situation in Afghanistan is alarming. Women's and girls' full and equal enjoyment of human rights can never be negotiable. It must be a front and center political priority. We expect the Taliban to respect and ensure the fulfillment of Afghanistan's obligations under international law, and to hear the demands from the Afghans and the international community. We're not witnessing isolated cases of violations and abuses of women's enjoyment of human rights, but a systematic eradication of their human rights and freedoms. Women are forced to disappear from the public space, but let me assure you, they will not disappear. We will not forget, nor give up on the Afghan women. Mr. President, the humanitarian, human rights, economic and political crises are all interconnected and we must address them simultaneously. The ongoing crisis affects women and girls disproportionately. Only inclusive political process and safe participatory dialogue to decide on the future of Afghanistan can provide a path towards sustainable peace and development. We call on the Taliban to reconsider the decisions and policies that restrict the rights of women and their participation in economic, social, and political life. Access to education for all children, girls and boys, is a human right. Shutting girls out of secondary schools will carry an impact on their lives and on the Afghan society that will be hard to reverse. This will have a huge impact for generations to come. We urge the Taliban to live up to their promises and act immediately to open schools for all girls. We strongly condemn killings, arbitrary detentions, enforced disappearances, and any discrimination, abuse, and reprisals against protesters, persons belonging to ethnic or religious groups, human rights defenders, and media workers. Rather, the de facto authorities should engage with them and enable their work and participation. We welcome the general amnesty declared by the Taliban, and we urge Taliban now to fully implement and enforce that amnesty. Mr. President, the security situation remains a concern, including the terrorist threat. Continued attacks targeting civilians, school facilities, and mosques are a great concern. These are grave violations of the international humanitarian law. The de facto authorities are now responsible for providing security to those in danger, and those responsible must be held accountable. The humanitarian situation is bleak. Recurring droughts, long-lasting effects of past conflicts, and the exclusion of women from society, inter alia, continue to hamper Afghanistan's food security and the humanitarian situation as a whole. Another winter season is near. It is of utmost importance that the flow of humanitarian aid and support to basic needs and services to the Afghan people and to the livelihoods of local communities continue. We need to support civil society in their struggle to preserve social structures. The Taliban must ensure that this help can continue independently without any interference by the de facto authorities. We also need to explore sustainable ways to secure financial transactions in and out of Afghanistan to avoid an economic collapse. The Nordic countries continue to follow the developments in Afghanistan closely. Taliban will not be assessed by their words, but by their actions. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Finland. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United States.
Mr. President, thank you for holding this important debate. The United States remains committed to the Afghan people, especially Afghan women, girls, and at-risk ethnic and religious communities. We are meeting at a deeply challenging time for these communities. Since taking power, the Taliban have severely restricted women's exercise of their rights in Afghanistan, turning back 2 decades of progress that Afghan women themselves built with the support of the international community. As the Special Rapporteur for the situation of human rights in Afghanistan, Richard Bennett, has reported, quote, "In no other country have women and girls so rapidly disappeared from all spheres of public life," end quote. The Taliban have rolled back women's and girls' right to education, women's right to work, and women's freedom of movement and assembly. Rates of gender-based violence are skyrocketing, Independent media, and particularly female journalists, have been censored. ISIS-K has perpetuated horrific attacks on the Hazara community, including their recent attack on an educational center in Kabul, which killed over 50 people, most of them girls. Here at the United Nations, we recall that the UN Charter affirms the faith of all peoples of the United Nations, quote, in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women, end quote. These are universal rights that all UN member states are supposed to subscribe to. If the Taliban hope to be seen as legitimate and for Afghanistan to resume its rightful place in the international community, they must allow women and girls to resume their rightful place in Afghan society. The United States has provided more than $1.1 billion in total humanitarian assistance in Afghanistan since the Taliban takeover more than 1 year ago in August 2021. The United States urges other members of the international community to generously support Afghanistan's humanitarian needs and maintain support for the Afghan people. For the effective delivery of humanitarian assistance, we reiterate the importance of full, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access for all humanitarian personnel, including women. We have also supported the establishment of a mechanism to enable $3.5 billion of Afghan central bank assets to be used for the benefit of the people of Afghanistan while keeping these funds out of the hands of the Taliban and other malign actors. With the help of Swiss and Afghan partners, the Afghan Fund was incorporated as a Swiss foundation to protect, preserve, and, on a targeted basis, disperse $3.5 billion for the benefit of the Afghan people. These disbursements are intended to help address the acute effects of Afghanistan's economic and humanitarian crises by supporting Afghanistan's macroeconomic and financial stability. We would also like to thank Germany for its work in producing a balanced resolution that covers a broad range of issues at play in Afghanistan, from human rights to counterterrorism to humanitarian assistance and more. We encourage all UN member states to support this resolution. Let me simply conclude by reaffirming the US commitment to the future of Afghanistan and the future of its people. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Qatar.
شكرا سيد الرئيس، أشكركم على عقد هذا الاجتماع المهم في إطار مناقشة الحالة في أفغانستان، وأشكر سعادة الأمين العام على تقريره، والشكر موصول للوفد الدائم للجمهورية الألمانية الاتحادية لقيادته عملية التفاوض بشأن مشروع القرار المقدم للجمعية العامة. ويضم وفد بلادي صوته للبيان المقدم من المملكة العربية السعودية نيابة عن دول مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية. سيد الرئيس، إن دولة قطر ومنذ بداية انخراطها البناء في أفغانستان كانت غاياتها واضحة ومحددة، وهي تتمثل في تنفيذ أهداف ومرجعيات سياستها الخارجية التي ترتكز على منهج الدبلوماسية الوقائية القائمة على الوساطة وحل المنازعات الإقليمية والدولية عبر الحوار والتفاوض، ومساعدة الشعب الأفغاني لتحقيق الحرية والسلام والتنمية، إضافة إلى تعزيز الأمن والاستقرار الإقليمي والدولي. ومن أجل تحقيق هذه الغايات قامت دولة قطر بجهود دبلوماسية وسياسية مضنية على مدى سنوات عديدة في إطار تيسير المفاوضات بين أطراف الحرب المحليين والدوليين لإنهاء الحرب في أفغانستان، والتي أثمرت في الوصول إلى الإعلان المشترك بين الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وطالبان لإحلال السلام في أفغانستان في فبراير 2020، والذي رحب به مجلس الأمن. هذا بالإضافة إلى الجهود الراهنة المستمرة والمتمثلة في تيسير وتعزيز قنوات الاتصال بين الشركاء الدوليين وحكومة تصريف الأعمال الأفغانية، وذلك فيما يتعلق بتعزيز السلام وحماية المدنيين وإيصال المساعدات الإنسانية والتنموية وحماية وتعزيز الحقوق السياسية والاقتصادية والاجتماعية للشعب الأفغاني، بما في ذلك حقوق الأطفال والنساء والفتيات. سيد الرئيس، سهلت دولة قطر واحدة من أكبر عمليات الإجلاء في التاريخ الحديث، فقد قامت بإجلاء 80,000 شخصاً بما في ذلك الأفغان والأجانب المعرضين لمخاطر عالية، وتقديم الدعم لهم في الدوحة، بما في ذلك المأوى والرعاية الصحية. وفي مارس 2022 نظمت دولة قطر مؤتمر التعهدات الاستجابة الإنسانية للوضع في أفغانستان بالاشتراك مع الأمم المتحدة والشركاء الدوليين بغية تخفيف معاناة الأفغان، حيث تعهدت دولة قطر بتقديم 25 مليون دولار أمريكي للشعب الأفغاني استجابة لخطة الاستجابة الإنسانية لأفغانستان. سيد الرئيس، إنه بالإضافة إلى جهود صناعة السلام والوساطة والمساعدات الإنسانية، وضعت دولة قطر هدف بناء السلام والتنمية كأولوية من أولويات انخراطها في أفغانستان في مرحلة ما بعد الحرب، خاصة قضية تمكين النساء والفتيات. لذلك وخلال السنتين الماضيتين قامت مؤسسة التعليم فوق الجميع في دولة قطر ومعهد التعليم الدولي ومقره بالولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وصندوق قطر للتنمية بمبادرة لمساعدة 250 طالباً أفغانياً نصفهم من النساء، وذلك من خلال مشروع منحة دولة قطر للاجئين الأفغان لاستئناف ومواصلة دراستهم. ختاماً السيد الرئيس، إن دولة قطر تجدد التزامها الثابت بالعمل مع الأمم المتحدة، خاصة بعثة الأمم المتحدة لتقديم المساعدة لأفغانستان، والتي نشيد بدورها الحيوي في هذا المضمار، بالإضافة إلى الشركاء الإقليميين والدوليين، وذلك لدعم الأشقاء الأفغان بكل فئاتهم وقومياتهم في إطار مساعينا نحو ترسيخ السلام والأمن والاستقرار والتنمية وتعزيز حماية حقوق الإنسان، بما في ذلك حقوق النساء والفتيات والأطفال في أفغانستان. سيظل هدفنا دائماً أفغانستان مستقرة ومزدهرة. إننا ندعو الجميع إلى العمل سوياً وبإرادة سياسية قوية ومخلصة، وذلك حتى لا تظل أفغانستان عنواناً مأساوياً لفشل المجتمع الدولي والإنسانية. وشكراً لكم السيد الرئيس.
أنا أشكر سعادة السفيرة لدولة قطر. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of India.
Mr. President, I would like to thank you for facilitating this plenary meeting. I would also like to express our appreciation to Germany for their role in facilitating this resolution on Afghanistan. Mr. President, as a contiguous neighbor of Afghanistan with strong historical and cultural links, our approach to Afghanistan, as always, will be guided by our historical friendship and our special relationship with the people of Afghanistan. As a neighbor and long-standing partner of Afghanistan, India has direct stakes in ensuring the return of peace and stability to the country. The elements in the draft resolution have set forth common concerns, the priorities, and the ask of the international community. India's main priorities in Afghanistan include providing immediate humanitarian assistance for the Afghan people, formation of a truly inclusive and representative government, combating terrorism, drug trafficking, and preserving the rights of women, children, and minorities. These benchmarks were also set forth by the Security Council Resolution 2593, which guides the international community's approach towards Afghanistan. Mr. President, India is deeply concerned at the unfolding humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. In response to the humanitarian needs of the Afghan people, as well as to the urgent appeals made by the United Nations, in the last several months, India has dispatched several shipments of humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. These include 40,000 metric tons of wheat and about 50 tons of medical aid consisting of essential life-saving medicines, anti-TB medicines, 500,000 doses of COVID vaccine, medical surgical items, and 25 tons of disaster relief aid. These aid consignments were handed over to the Indira Gandhi Children's Hospital, Kabul, the Afghan Red Crescent Society, and other UN specialized agencies, including WFP and UN-OCHA. In order to closely monitor and coordinate the efforts of various stakeholders for the effective delivery of humanitarian assistance and in continuation to our engagement with the Afghan people, an Indian technical team has also been deployed at our embassy in Kabul. Mr. President, India is closely monitoring the security situation in Afghanistan and is actively engaged with the international community on issues related to Afghanistan. In the recent past, terrorist attacks have targeted public spaces like places of worship and educational institutions, especially of minorities. This is a concerning trend, and India strongly condemns the targeting of innocent civilians. The attack at the diplomatic premises of the Russian Federation is highly condemnable. The collective approach of the international community has been articulated by the Security Council Resolution 2593. It unequivocally demands that the territory of Afghanistan should not be used for sheltering, training, planning, or financing terrorist acts, especially terrorist individuals and entities proscribed by the UN Security Council, including Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. India notes the useful role of UN Security Council monitoring team has played and expects them to continue to monitor and report on all terrorist groups that might use Afghanistan as a base to target other countries. Mr. President, linked to the issue of terrorism is the menace of drug trafficking. We have recently seized big shipments of drugs at our ports and in the high seas of our coasts. It is important to strengthen international cooperation to disrupt and dismantle these trafficking networks. On the political front, India continues to call for an inclusive dispensation in Afghanistan, which represents all sections of the Afghan society. A broad-based, inclusive, and representative formation is necessary for long-term peace and stability in Afghanistan. Mr. President, peace and security in Afghanistan are critical imperatives that all of us need to collectively strive for. India will continue to play its role in pursuit of this objective. The interests of the Afghan people will continue to be at the heart of our efforts in Afghanistan. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of India. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uzbekistan.
Mr. President, since the change of power in Afghanistan last year and the formation of interim Taliban government, this country has been experiencing the deepest socio-economic and humanitarian crisis in its recent history. Unfortunately, against the backdrop of other current international challenges, the settlement of the Afghan issue began to fade into the background. But we must not allow the mistake of the past to be repeated by abandoning Afghanistan alone with its own problem. Today, more than ever, the Afghan people need help of the international community. Further isolation of the de facto Afghan authorities will inevitably lead to increased radicalization in the country and its transformation into a platform or safe haven for international terrorist organizations. Indeed, today one should admit that the new government of Afghanistan is not fully meeting the demand of the international community on forming an inclusive government, ensuring fundamental human rights, including those of women and national minorities, cutting ties with various terrorist groups. At the same time, one can also observe some encouraging steps taken by Taliban in fighting against drug trafficking and drug addiction, allowing girls on the northern provinces to get school education, returning women back to work in state institutions, resuming paying salary to civil servants. In this context, we believe that the new authorities of Afghanistan need some time to fulfill their international obligations. The practice of pressure and threat should go down history. Only in this case we will be able to achieve real headway in Afghanistan. Mr. President, Uzbekistan for the past year has been taking coherent steps to ensure that the Afghan issue remains among other top priorities of the international community. At the recent SICA summit in Astana, President of Uzbekistan, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, has put forward an important initiative to form an a high-level international negotiating group to prepare and agree with the Afghan authorities an algorithm for the phased fulfillment of the obligation of the parties. This initiative would allow not only to bring in closer the position of various countries towards the new authority of Afghanistan, but also would be conducive to addressing current dire socio-economic situation in this country. Moreover, the group on an ongoing basis could conduct direct negotiation with Taliban movement to develop a detailed roadmap on the fulfillment by the interim government of Afghanistan of the following international demands and obligations. First, forming an inclusive government with the participation of all ethnic groups and religious confessions of Afghanistan. Second, ensuring fundamental human rights, especially those of women and national minorities, providing to all Afghan girls access to full school education. Third, preventing the transformation of Afghan territory again into a springboard for international terrorists. Fourth, cutting all ties with various terrorist groups on the territory of the country, first and foremost with Al-Qaeda and ISIL. We believe that this concrete step by Taliban would not only lead to the improvement of international community's attitude toward the de facto government, but also would be conducive to unfreezing foreign assets of the country, gradual exclusion of the leadership of the Taliban movement from the UN Security Council sanction list, resumption of the financial assistance by the donor countries, stepping up of international efforts on branding to the Afghan people, humanitarian and other aid under the UN auspices. Herein, maintaining active discussion with the current authority in Kabul on issues pertaining to the implementation in Afghanistan of various infrastructural projects, first and foremost in the transport, logistical, and energy spheres, should be among key goals of the proposed group. Special attention should also be given to more active involvement of Afghanistan into regional integration processes of economic nature. Thus, through the activity of this negotiating group, we could achieve practical implementation of regional connectivity, where Afghanistan will be an important bridge connecting Central and South Asia. The proposed group may include UN member states, as well as international organizations that are not indifferent to the fate of the long-suffering Afghan people. Mr. President, in conclusion, I would like to emphasize that Uzbekistan supports today's resolution on Afghanistan because we do believe that the international community should continue its support to the Afghan people to build a stable, resilient, prosperous, and secure state. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uzbekistan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Russian Federation.
Господин председатель, Российская Федерация придает особое значение рассмотрению Генеральной Ассамблеи ситуации в Афганистане. Мы последовательно выступаем за принятие подлинно консенсусной резолюции Генеральной Ассамблеи ООН, текст которой отражал бы современные реалии и консолидированные подходы международного сообщества к поиску путей эффективного и долгосрочного афганского урегулирования. К сожалению, уже который год ситуация в ходе работы над документом демонстрирует нам обратное. Мы видим настойчивые попытки западных коллег навязать всему международному сообществу свою трактовку происходящего в стране. Это делается для того, чтобы тщательно затушевать последствия своей 20-летней войны и безответственного бегства иностранных войск в конце августа 2021 года. Налицо лицемерное перекладывание ответственности за провал своей военной кампании и за текущую деградирующую ситуацию исключительно на новые власти. На этом фоне текущие социально-экономические и гуманитарные проблемы, с которыми сталкивается Афганистан, равно как и озабоченности региональных государств, были попросту проигнорированы. Мы неоднократно подчеркивали, что государствам-членам Генассамблеи было вполне по силам достичь консенсуса при согласовании резолюции по Афганистану. Для этого необходимо, чтобы сам процесс был объективным и учитывал широкую гамму позиций. На деле же мы видим, что наши западные коллеги по-прежнему не заинтересованы в честной работе, предпочитая ей закулисную игру и манипуляции. Вот и в этот раз они попросту потребовали, в том числе путем давления на самих неформальных кураторов, убрать из текста все то, что, по их мнению, мешает правильному восприятию текущей ситуации в стране и ее причин. Неудивительно, что из итогового документа были удалены любые упоминания о расследовании военных преступлений западной коалиции в Афганистане, которые из-за угроз США Международный уголовный суд в спешном порядке был вынужден деприоритизировать. На Западе хотели бы, чтобы все забыли о безответственных действиях американских и натовских военных, регулярно наносивших беспорядочные авиаудары по простым афганцам. Не говоря уже о ночных рейдах и убийствах без суда и следствия мирных жителей, включая женщин и детей. Об этом, к слову, буквально недавно в очередной раз писала BBC. К сожалению, несмотря на доклады различных независимых неправительственных организаций о чудовищных военных преступлениях с целью добиться справедливости и привлечения виновных к ответственности, расследования так и не были проведены из-за грубого шантажа со стороны Вашингтона. Впрочем, подобный цинизм не новость, а типичная для США и их союзников в отношении к совершенным им военным преступлениям и в других кризисных точках, в том числе в Ираке, Сирии, Ливии. На этом фоне лицемерными выглядят попытки западных коллег выпячивать лишь тему нарушения прав человека, совершаемых де-факто властями. Неприемлемыми для наших западных коллег оказались и пассажи об отставленном США и НАТО оружии в стране после спешного вывода войск. При этом указанные делегации уже даже не пытались аргументированно разъяснять свою позицию по тем или иным проблемным для них моментам. В условиях деградирующей гуманитарной и экономической ситуации в Афганистане за скобками, по сути, осталась проблема скорейшего решения изрядно затянувшегося вопроса с разморозкой афганских активов, необходимых для экономического восстановления страны и ее дальнейшего развития. Видим отсутствие готовности у западных доноров всерьез обсуждать эту тему, без попыток использовать при этом финансовый вопрос в качестве рычага давления на де-факто власть. При этом очевидно, что судьба простых афганцев, не имеющих элементарных средств к существованию, волнует указанные страны в последнюю очередь. Разочарованы демонстративным нежеланием некоторых западных коллег даже упоминать роль региональных организаций, включая ШОС, ОДКБ и ОИС, а также учитывать предложения региональных государств по содействию социально-экономическому восстановлению и последующему развитию страны. Вызывает глубокое сожаление, что в конечном итоге из-за заранее ангажированной позиции в пользу одной группы стран и демонстративного игнорирования предложений, поддержанных региональными государствами, документ получился несбалансированным. В этих условиях мы вынуждены поставить резолюцию на голосование. В заключение хотел бы подчеркнуть, что, несмотря на сложившуюся с резолюцией ситуацию, мы по-прежнему поддерживаем Афганистан и его народ в этот важный для него период, и наше голосование следует трактовать не иначе, как неодобрение действий и методов работы неформальных кураторов досье. Благодарю вас.
I thank the distinguished representative of Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan.
Mr. President, Pakistan and Afghanistan are inextricably bound by the bonds of culture, faith, ethnicity, and common geography. For the last 40 years, the people of Pakistan have endured prolonged sufferings from foreign interventions, civil war, and terrorism. As Afghanistan's immediate neighbor, Pakistan has a vital stake in peace and stability in Afghanistan. In an Afghanistan which is at peace with itself, which is at peace with its neighbors, which is at peace with the wider international community. And Afghanistan which respects and nurtures all its citizens, irrespective of gender, ethnicity, or religion. An Afghanistan which is free of terrorism. And a prosperous Afghanistan which is well integrated into the international community. Mr. President, 1 year after the withdrawal of foreign troops and assumption of power by the Taliban government, the first priority remains the prevention of a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. 95% of Afghanistan people live in extreme poverty, and another winter is coming. To prevent another humanitarian crisis, the international community must respond positively to the UN Secretary General's call for $4.2 billion in humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. Despite its own calamity from the epic flood disaster, this year Pakistan has kept open the land, air, and sea corridor to and from Afghanistan, and to provide such support as we can to our Afghan brothers and sisters. And even after 40 years, Pakistan continues to host and support over 3 million Afghan refugees. Secondly, it is essential to revive the Afghan economy, especially the banking system, without which commerce and investment has been frozen. The urgent release of Afghanistan's national reserves held abroad will be crucial to revival of the banking system and to promote normal business activity. The early resumption of reconstruction in Afghanistan and implementation of the shovel-ready regional connectivity and infrastructure projects with Central Asia, as well as extension of the China-Pakistan economic corridor to Afghanistan, can contribute immensely to development and peace in Afghanistan and the adjacent regions. Third, it is critical to avoid actions that could ignite another internal conflict within Afghanistan. Regardless of ideological considerations, the world must welcome that after 40 years, one authority controls the entire territory of Afghanistan, and that there is no credible challenge to its authority. It is essential to ensure that spoilers within or outside Afghanistan are not able to foment instability, insurgency, or terrorism in Afghanistan. The role of spoilers, especially the one from our region, who wishes to aid and abet terrorism against Pakistan from Afghan soil, must be checked, and the terrorist network it has established must be dismantled in Afghanistan and the region. It is in the vital interest of the entire international community to effectively end the threat of terrorism within or from Afghanistan posed by ISILK, Daesh, the TTP, ETIM, IMU, and other terrorist groups. We must develop a comprehensive counter-terrorism strategy, and to do so, engagement with the de facto government is essential. Pakistan will support counter-terrorism efforts while respecting Afghanistan's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Pakistan fully shares the international community's desire to ensure full protection of human rights, especially women's rights and greater political, social, and gender inclusion. These objectives are more likely to be achieved through greater and sustained engagement with Afghanistan and its de facto government. It is worth repeating, what could not be realized through force cannot be achieved through isolation, sanctions, or financial coercion. A coercive approach could lead to renewed violence and conflict, strengthen terrorist groups, and generate a new flow of Afghan refugees, which none of Afghan's neighbors are in a position to accommodate. Mr. President, on human rights and girls' education, Pakistan, along with other OIC countries, remains engaged. Through conversations between Taliban and the delegations of Islamic scholars and ulama to address questions of Sharia
and its interpretation, particularly with a view to facilitating education prospects for Afghan women and girls. It is important that we continue to build upon these initiatives with patience and perseverance. As regards political inclusion, the efforts by the de facto Afghan government to encourage the return of former Afghan officials and announcement of general amnesty must be welcomed and built upon to promote greater inclusivity in the governance of Afghanistan. We should also welcome the announcement by the de facto government of a ban on poppy cultivation. To succeed in imposing this ban, the international community should support efforts to promote alternate crops that can support the livelihood of Afghan farmers. Mr. President, we trust that UNAMA will maintain its close engagement and build a relationship of mutual trust with the de facto government of Afghanistan. We welcome the appointment of new SRSG, Her Excellency Rosa Otunbayeva. We hope UNAMA's composition will become aligned with the new realities in Afghanistan. Finally, the international community must build a realistic and pragmatic path towards normalization in Afghanistan, one which addresses the concerns of the world community, human rights, inclusion, terrorism, while also accommodating the legitimate expectations of the de facto Afghan government. Pakistan will continue its endeavor to this end within the format of Afghanistan's 6 immediate neighbors plus Russia within the OIC and with other friendly countries. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Pakistan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malaysia.
Mr. President, the situation in Afghanistan is of grave concern to Malaysia. The precarious security environment, curtailing of civil liberties, and dire humanitarian scenario are intensifying the hardship faced by the Afghan people. The food insecurity and malnutrition crisis and the combination of severe drought and national disaster further exacerbate their plight. In his report, the Secretary General highlighted that approximately 24.4 million people, or 59% of the estimated population of Afghanistan, are in need of humanitarian assistance this year, up from 18.4 million people at the beginning of 2021. The international community must work hand in hand to alleviate the sufferings of the people of Afghanistan, especially those impacted by disaster and food insecurity. In response to the earthquake and floods that struck Afghanistan earlier this year, the government of Malaysia recently made a contribution of $200,000 through the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, UNOCHA. This contribution is in addition to the one made during the virtual high-level ministerial meetings on the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan on 13 September 2021, as well as through the OIC Humanitarian Trust Fund for Afghanistan established in December 2021. In addition, a number of Malaysian non-governmental organizations continue to engage with relevant parties and have actively extended humanitarian assistance to the Afghan people, including through humanitarian relief missions and the operation of health and preschool facilities. Malaysia expresses appreciation to the leadership and staff members of the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, UNAMA, for their unstinting assistance to the government and the people of Afghanistan, and echoes the Secretary General appeal for funding support to the humanitarian response plan to meet the $2.59 billion shortfall in order to enable the provision of life-saving response to Afghans in need. Mr. President, Malaysia remains committed to an Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, an Afghan-controlled peace and national reconciliation process. This process must be inclusive and uphold human rights and fundamental freedoms, which include full and meaningful participation of women, youth, and persons belonging to ethnic, religious, and other minority groups. In this regard, Malaysia is concerned with the infringement of the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan, particularly the continued deprivation of secondary and tertiary education for girls. All impediments to the full enjoyment of these fundamental rights must be promptly removed. Malaysia is also deeply concerned with the persistent attacks against ethnic, religious, and other minority groups in Afghanistan, in particular by terrorist groups. We condemn in the strongest term terrorism in all of its form and manifestation, and deplore the spate of attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure, including educational facilities, religious sites, as well as diplomatic premises and personnel. The perpetrators of such heinous acts must be held accountable. Malaysia notes with appreciation the recommendations contained in the latest report by UNGA on human rights in Afghanistan, published in June 2022, and calls for their careful consideration and prompt implementation, including by the international community. Mr. President, decades of conflict on Afghan soil have resulted in contamination of remnants of war, in particular explosive ordnance. These, coupled with the significant threat of improvised explosive devices, IEDs, continue to pose serious harm to civilians and humanitarian personnel with disproportionate impacts on children. Every now and then, civilians are either killed or maimed due to detonation of unexploded ordnance or IEDs. Malaysia commends the work of the United Nations Mine Action Service in clearing contaminated land in Afghanistan in the face of challenging circumstances, and call for support in eradicating the harm posed by remnants of war and IEDs. There is also a need to undertake concrete measures to address the narcotics problem in Afghanistan, given the strong linkages to criminal activities and terrorism. We note the ban on all cultivation of opium poppy and all narcotics decreed by the Taliban government in April 2022, as well as the engagement with the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, on alternative livelihood programs for farmers. Mr. President, while the peace and national reconciliation process must emanate from within Afghanistan, the support of the international community is a requisite towards creating favorable conditions in this regard. Regional cooperation plays an important role in the creation of such conditions in Afghanistan and should be recognized. Malaysia wishes to acknowledge the efforts and contribution of the various regional organizations and arrangements vis-à-vis Afghanistan. On the draft resolution contained in document L11 before us this morning, Malaysia takes this opportunity to thank the permanent mission of Germany for facilitating the negotiations of the text. We understand that the draft has been presented represents a delicate balance of the different views of delegations. While there is a desire for more ambitious language on humanitarian assistance, socio-economic development, and regional cooperation, we understand that not all delegations shared this view during the negotiations. Nonetheless, Malaysia will support the draft resolution as contained in document L11. Malaysia reaffirms its readiness to collaborate with third countries to provide humanitarian assistance, human capital development, and financial assistance to the people of Afghanistan, including through various non-governmental organizations. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malaysia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico.
Señor Presidente, la cuestión de Afganistán representa uno de los mayores desafíos que tiene ante sí la comunidad internacional. País asolado por la situación humanitaria, una economía colapsada, frecuentes incidentes terroristas y una severa crisis de derechos humanos. Los informes del secretario general no dejan lugar a dudas sobre la regresión que se ha registrado en materia de derechos de las mujeres y de las niñas en Afganistán, así como la exclusión de minorías y otros grupos étnicos en los principales cargos de gobierno, situación lamentable al tratarse de un pueblo tan diverso como es el pueblo afgano. El derecho fundamental a la educación, así como lo establecido en la Convención sobre los Derechos del Niño, debe cumplirse a cabalidad como elemento indispensable para asegurar el futuro de Afganistán. México cree firmemente en el diálogo como la única opción para apoyar al pueblo afgano, pero resulta frustrante reiterar exhortos una y otra vez para que se respeten y cumplan promesas sin que se presenten resultados concretos. Reiteramos que debería haber un cambio sustancial hacia un sistema de participación y gobernanza incluyente, así como un marco legal en el que se asegure el acceso a la justicia y se cumpla con las obligaciones internacionales asumidas en su momento por Afganistán. Frente a los crecientes niveles de inseguridad alimentaria, se necesita asegurar un acceso humanitario irrestricto y sin discriminación. La recuperación económica es esencial para lograr un Afganistán estable, por lo que ante la crisis actual resulta urgente crear fuentes de empleo, volviendo a observar que la mitad de la fuerza laboral afgana está impedida para trabajar. La exclusión de las mujeres significa que independientemente del apoyo que pueda brindar la comunidad internacional, la barrera estructural es de tal magnitud que impide alcanzar resultados duraderos. Ante la severidad de las necesidades humanitarias, Afganistán no puede renunciar a la aportación de las mujeres. Una paz sostenible pasa por la participación plena, igualitaria y significativa de las mujeres afganas en los procesos de pacificación y reconstrucción del país. Al respecto, México rechaza también los casos de abusos y las represalias en contra de las defensoras de derechos humanos, activistas de la sociedad civil, trabajadoras de la salud y personal humanitario. La lucha contra el flagelo del terrorismo en Afganistán debe también mantenerse como una prioridad. Los ataques que han tenido lugar en el último año representan un saldo inaceptable de muertos y heridos, a lo que se añade que varios de los atentados estuvieron dirigidos contra minorías. Reiteramos que el territorio afgano no puede convertirse nuevamente en una base de operación para actividades terroristas. México reconoce, sin embargo, la labor de la UNAMA y de las agencias, fondos y programas que se encuentran presentes en el terreno. Al respecto, debemos destacar el importante trabajo que realiza la misión en materia de combate al tráfico de armas pequeñas y ligeras, de conformidad con el mandato que le otorgamos. Celebramos que el proyecto de resolución a consideración de la Asamblea General incorpora este aspecto relativo al tráfico de armas y hacemos votos para que también se considere la dimensión regional del tráfico de armas pequeñas y ligeras. De igual forma, reconocemos la labor que realizan los países vecinos de Afganistán y los instamos a seguir colaborando en favor de la estabilización del país. Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico. I will now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
At the outset, I would like to thank the permanent representative of Germany for introducing the draft resolution on the situation in Afghanistan. Indonesia believes that in this pivotal juncture, it is important to value accommodation over confrontation to move the process forward and overcome stagnation. Hence, my delegation affirms Indonesia's long-standing commitment to supporting Afghanistan in restoring peace and paving the way toward well-being and prosperity. We are convinced that only an Afghan-led and Afghan-owned peace process can resolve the decades of conflict. This process should lead to a comprehensive agreement that focuses on the interests of the Afghan people, including its women and girls, to overcome the crisis and guarantee long-lasting peace, development, and stability in Afghanistan. Against this backdrop, Indonesia would like to emphasize the following points. First, the full, equal, effective, and meaningful participation of Afghan women in all walks of life is crucial to overcoming the crisis and building a peaceful, stable, and prosperous Afghanistan. On March 2022, Indonesia signed a letter of intent with Qatar on the delivery of humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan, with special attention on access to education for all, including women and girls. Through this partnership, we aim to provide more scholarships and capacity-building programs at the grassroots level to ensure the protection and promotion of human rights, especially the rights to education and freedom of movement. Prior to this initiative, we also fostered women's empowerment by establishing the Afghanistan-Indonesia Women's Solidarity Network in 2020. This network serves as a platform for Afghan women to increase their capacity for involvement and participation in the peace process. Second, acknowledging and understanding the dynamics interplay between religion and multifaceted conflicts in the country will contribute to a more sustainable future engagement in peace-building process. As the world's largest Muslim-populated country with diverse cultural background, Indonesia believes in the implementation of Islam Rahmatan lil Alamin, or blessing of the universe. For this part, we continue to foster dialogue between ulamas in Indonesia and Afghanistan through conference and meetings to further facilitate the exchange of views in practicing Islam to increase better understanding of teaching of moderation, tolerance, and mutual respect. Indonesia with Qatar recently conducted a meeting between ulamas from Indonesia, Qatar, and Afghanistan in Doha, and also participated in the OIC Ulama visit to Kabul. During both meetings, in which Indonesian women ulama also participated, we emphasized how access to education for women and girls in harmony with Islamic values contributes to nurturing peace. Lastly, Indonesia continues to call for the de facto authorities to fulfill its promises and commitment. Despite the ongoing efforts, we have yet to see such significant development in Afghanistan. Indonesia remains concerned over the increasing security challenges towards the full withdrawal of foreign troops and significantly rising terrorist attacks aimed at the civilian population. The country also endured a deteriorating situation which calls for immediate humanitarian mitigation. A roadmap with action plans to realize these commitments is essential to measure progress and follow-ups, and this should be showcased by the de facto authorities. This is imperative not only to ensure safety within Afghanistan, but also stability in the region. To conclude, unity of international community support remains vital to safeguarding the peace process, ensuring unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance, and ensuring genuine relief to the Afghan people. The draft resolution reflects our continued collective support for promoting an inclusive, Afghan-owned, Afghan-led peace process in their endeavor to build a more stable, prosperous, and democratic country. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia. I will now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful, Mr. President, over the past 4 decades, the General Assembly has addressed the situation in Afghanistan, focusing in peace, stability, good governance, human rights, and development. This year, the General Assembly will consider the draft resolution considering situation in Afghanistan for the first time since the irresponsible withdrawal of the foreign forces and Taliban takeover. And debate comes at a critical time in the ongoing situation in Afghanistan, which is now dealing with a number of interconnected and overlapping crises. The humanitarian situation is particularly dire. Millions of people are now living in poverty. Food insecurity is exacerbating, and human rights continue to be violated, particularly against women and girls who are still denied access to education. Meanwhile, the de facto authorities have yet to fulfill their international obligations. The current situation in Afghanistan serves as a reminder that military intervention in other countries under the pretext of combating terrorism while claiming to bring democracy, peace, and prosperity not only degrades those common values but also harms those states and their people. This catastrophic situation entails responsibility and obligation of those foreign forces that illegally invaded the occupied Afghanistan under the guise of fighting terrorism and left nothing but devastation of their wake. Today, my delegation will vote in favor of the draft resolution to send a strong message that all members will stand firmly in unity with the people of Afghanistan and in our effort to build a peaceful, prosperous, and self-resilient country. The further of Afghanistan principally contingent on the restoration of country's constitution and a strong commitment on it. An inclusive government based on an established constitution is the only way to ensure and protect the right of all Afghan people, including women and girls, as well as linguistic, racial, and religious minorities. In a multiple ethnic and diverse society such as that Afghanistan, no single group, party, or faction can claim to hold power by itself alone. The Taliban must be mindful of the international community repeated call for the formation of such a government that accurately reflects Afghanistan multi-ethnic society. The formation of an inclusive government based on an established constitution is a critical component for international recognition. The international community must sustain in support to Afghanistan, particularly in terms of provision of humanitarian and development assistance that has been critical in responding to the immediate needs of the Afghan people, maintaining basic services and reviving the economy. In this regard, restoring banking and financial system as well as enabling access to frozen assets belonging to the Afghan and Afghan central banks for the benefit of Afghan people is crucial and is a sustained and long-term solution in addressing the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. We emphasize that those assets must enjoy immunity and to be safeguarded from domestic judicial process and the exercise of extraterritorial jurisdiction. It is also regrettable that, again due to the objection of some Western countries, the draft resolution has failed to refer to the role of foreign military intervention as well as irresponsible withdrawal of the foreign forces from Afghanistan in emerging such dire situation in Afghanistan. Moreover, we strongly emphasize the necessity of the investigation allegation of war crimes committed by foreign forces, including those previously conducted and now deprioritized due to the bias and political pressures. Afghanistan's security situation remains a source of concern since attacks against civilian and civilian infrastructure, including educational centers and diplomatic premises, are on the rise. We strongly condemn all such attacks, most of which are perpetrated by the terrorist group, particularly Daesh elements of which are still being transferred from Syria and Iraq to Afghanistan. Terrorism has had a devastating impact on Afghanistan and its neighboring countries. We share the strong determination of the international community not to allow Afghanistan territory to be a safe haven for Al-Qaeda, the ISIS, or other international terrorist group and their affiliates, or used by them to threaten or attack any country. We highlight the international community ongoing demand that the Taliban must commit to fighting terrorism. Equally critical, addressing the serious threat caused by the illicit opium cultivation as well as drug production and trafficking must be a priority. Iran is directly affected by this immense and pays a high price for it. Over the past 40 years, Iran has played an active role in combating drug trafficking in the region, in which nearly 4,000 members of Iran's law enforcement forces have been martyred and over 12,000 others have been injured. We stress the importance of the narcotic ban on the cultivation, production, trafficking, and consumption of illicit drug, and express our concerns regarding the fact that amount of illicit opium cultivation as well as drug production has been rising in alarming level since the Taliban take over the country. Iran also highlights the importance of the comprehensive approach in addressing the drug problem of Afghanistan, which include agriculture and rural development program for creation of improved alternative licit livelihood for farmers. We believe that this important annual resolution shall also be improved on highlighting the vital role of the regional organization in promoting long-term stability of Afghanistan. We would like to highlight the foreign ministers' meeting among the neighboring countries of Afghanistan, which enjoys a large area of expertise and has proved its great value on critical issues for Afghanistan. Regional cooperation and regional connectivity are key and effective means in improving and bringing about peace, security, stability, and economic development in Afghanistan and in the region. The Islamic Republic of Iran, in close coordination with Afghanistan neighbors and other relevant parties, and while fully respecting Afghanistan territorial integrity, unity, and political independence, will continue to endeavors to assist the people of Afghanistan in restoring peace and stability and paving the way toward well-being and prosperity of all Afghans. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I will now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Well, thank you, President. Good morning, colleagues. Firstly, Australia thanks the Secretary-General for his report on the situation in Afghanistan. But I've got to say, Australia is extremely concerned by the report's findings of escalating abuses of women and girls' human rights. The growing humanitarian demands and ongoing problems with security also highlight the significant challenges facing the people of Afghanistan. And we're particularly concerned by the disproportionate and methodical targeting of the Hazara community. The senseless attacks on places of worship, schools, and public spaces are abhorrent. And we call for those responsible to be held accountable, and we call for those responsible to be brought to justice. We renew our call on the Taliban to respect the rights of all Afghans and ensure the protection of ethnic and religious minorities. The Taliban have spurned the opportunity for reform and instead have chosen to systematically roll back hard-won gains in human rights, including by taking away the rights of women and girls. They've doubled down on repression and non-inclusion and have been negligent in providing the most basic services to the people of Afghanistan. Colleagues, the gravity of the situation cannot be overstated. Effective humanitarian support is contingent upon unimpeded access to affected populations. Ensuring the safety and freedom of movement of all humanitarian staff, especially women, is essential. On security, the international community has been clear in its expectation that the Taliban does not support the presence of any terrorist group in Afghanistan, nor allow Afghan territory to be used to threaten or attack any country. Afghanistan continues to remain the only country in the world to deny girls their full right to education. This is unacceptable. Once again, we urge the Taliban to stand by its commitments to the Afghan people and immediately end the exclusion of girls from secondary education, and to set a firm date for the opening of secondary schools to all children. We call on the Taliban to respect the rights of Afghan women and girls by removing restrictions on their movement and right to access employment. Australia strongly supports the draft resolution on the situation in Afghanistan, and we join with the international community in reiterating our commitment to the people of Afghanistan. Australia is staying the path, no matter how long the journey. We are steadfast in our determination to support and speak up for the people of Afghanistan. Thank you, President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Australia. I will now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je veux commencer en félicitant le gouvernement d'Allemagne qui a fait un job remarquable pour nous donner un document qui reflète, je pense, l'opinion et les sentiments de toute l'Assemblée. Et je pense que c'est important que nous faisons tout un effort pour appuyer la résolution qui est devant nous aujourd'hui. Alors, mes collègues, nous sommes réunis aujourd'hui en tant que représentants des États membres des Nations Unies pour discuter de la situation qui est vraiment tragique en Afghanistan. 15 mois se sont écoulés depuis la chute de Kaboul, qui a mis fin à la prise de contrôle de l'Afghanistan par les talibans. Et pour beaucoup d'entre nous, malheureusement, je dois dire que nos pires craintes se sont réalisées. Des millions d'Afghans sont confrontés à une famine aiguë. Dans une grande partie du pays, les filles ne peuvent pas aller à l'école et il y a des femmes qui ne peuvent pas travailler et qui sont restreintes à la maison. Les femmes ne peuvent pas participer à la vie économique et sociale du pays, autrefois très dynamique. Les groupes terroristes prolifèrent dans tout le pays, alors que les journalistes, les défenseurs des droits de l'homme, les groupes minoritaires, les femmes, les anciens fonctionnaires du gouvernement, des membres des forces de sécurité et tant d'autres personnes vivent leur vie dans la crainte de la violence, de la détention arbitraire ou pire encore. Il y a plusieurs de mes collègues qui ont parlé de la situation, surtout de la communauté Hazara, et nous voyons jusqu'à quel point les vies de beaucoup de groupes sont devenues presque impossibles à cause de la position du gouvernement taliban. Je dois dire aussi que dans des circonstances incroyablement difficiles, l'ONU et ses agences ont été le principal point de contact entre le peuple afghan et la communauté internationale. Les courageux femmes et hommes qui servent en Afghanistan, pour nous, pour l'ONU, ont fourni une aide humanitaire d'une ampleur qui est sans précédent, dont plus de 2 milliards de dollars par le biais d'un plan d'intervention humanitaire de l'ONU qui a permis de maintenir en vie les citoyens afghans souffrant d'insécurité alimentaire pendant les mois d'hiver et par la suite. Et encore, ils sont en travail maintenant pour l'hiver qui vient. En 2022, le Canada a contribué à ces efforts en allouant plus de 140 millions de dollars en aide humanitaire à l'Afghanistan ainsi qu'aux pays voisins. And yet, Mr. President, here we are again. Winter is approaching, and the needs of the Afghan people are not being met by the Taliban. While we can all do more, and we must all do more to support the Afghan people, and Canada will be continuing its humanitarian support for the people of Afghanistan, it must be said that our ability to do so is restricted by the policies of the Taliban. How can an economy grow to its potential when half its population is restricted from the workforce? How can the health and education needs of a society be met if girls are not allowed to go to school? How can sustainable peace be achieved without an inclusive and representative governance and media freedom? And I note, Mr. President, the comments of the ambassador from Iran on this very subject. And how can we trust the Taliban as it continues to ignore its commitments by engaging with terrorist groups that we know are now active in Afghanistan and beyond, as well as terrorizing its own people? We have responded. The Security Council provided a clear and united message on the demands of the Taliban, and we've responded through the continued engagement of the UN Assistance Mission to Afghanistan, UNAMA, that was led at the time by a Canadian, Deborah Lyons, and now by Rosa Otunbayeva of Kyrgyzstan, who I've had the opportunity to discuss these issues with. We've also had the advantage of the appointment of a special rapporteur, Richard Bennett, whose report to the General Assembly last month on the situation and human rights in Afghanistan, and I commend that document to you for reading. It is a very compelling and accurate report of what's going on in the country, shared the serious concerns he has found with respect to girls' education, to child early and forced marriage, to violence against women and children, the right to work, reprisal killings, arbitrary detentions, and the persecution of ethnic and religious minorities. It's all there in Mr. Bennett's report. And he had the opportunity not only to interview the government, he also had the opportunity to travel throughout the country and to see for himself exactly what was going on. Unsurprisingly, the desire to leave Afghanistan has never been greater. And with the cooperation of close partners, including Qatar, UAE, Turkey, and Pakistan, Canada has been able to fulfill our commitments to resettle 40,000 Afghan refugees, with nearly 23,000 Afghans welcomed so far. And we are grateful for the support. At the same time, in my role as chair of the Group of Friends of Afghanistan here in New York, we have been meeting both with the leadership of UNAMA on a regular basis and with the voices of Afghan civil society, who convey very clearly the difficulties of life under the Taliban, particularly for women and girls. In fact, in recent weeks, we have heard calls to action from these brave leaders, talking to us directly, to recognize the continued discrimination against women by the Taliban as what they call gender apartheid or gender persecution. Canada is committed to fighting this systematic discrimination against women and continuing to work for change. It's essential that the Assembly deliver a united message. It's essential that the people of Afghanistan know that they are not abandoned. that our commitment to defending fundamental rights and freedoms as enshrined in the UN Charter remains strong, and that the suffering of Afghan women, children, and minority groups, that suffering is simply not acceptable to us, to all of us as member states of the United Nations, who are united behind the Charter. And that even as the Taliban seek to limit media freedoms, the international community is well aware of the violations that are being committed. There is no place to hide. There is no place you can pretend this isn't happening. There is no way with the societies in which we live that we can pretend we don't know what's going on. And we have to seek to hold the perpetrators accountable. In that respect, I want to be clear that Canada, in congratulating Germany for an outstanding job at a difficult time, we will certainly be supporting all of this resolution, and I call on all member states present to do so as well, and not to use the suffering of the Afghan people to advance their own political agendas. Well, sometimes when you spend the morning in listening to the debate, you get a chance to hear what people have to say. So, like many of you, I had the opportunity to listen to the comments of my colleague, the ambassador from Russia, from the Russian Federation. And he indicated that Russia would not be supporting the resolution because there were things that were absent from the document and because he didn't feel that it reflected perfectly the views of his government with respect to what should be in such a resolution. Well, sometimes it helps to have the resolution with you so you can read it. So when he said, for example, when the delegate from Russia said that there was no reference in the document to regional cooperation, that's actually not true. When you read the document, you'll see that it's there. When he said there was no reference to the fact that Afghan has been the subject of intervention by both Russia, although he didn't mention that intervention, but I'm mentioning it, by both the Russian Federation and by Western countries after the attack on the Twin Towers in New York City. He says, well, we didn't say anything about accountability, but actually there is very clear indication of the need for investigation and of the need for looking at not only current human rights abuses, but past human rights abuses. And then he complained that the ICC had dropped the investigation into the behavior of American or other troops in Afghanistan. Well, Russia's declined to sign the Rome Treaty. Russia is not a party to the Rome Treaty. So if Russia was really worried about crimes against humanity and about the investigatory capacity of the ICC, presumably they're now going to sign it. Because he said there was no mention of the ICC dropping its investigation in the report. So I can only assume that the Russian Federation is going to join the Rome Treaty, which I welcome. And as a president of the New York Working Group and as the vice president of the Assembly of States Parties, we would welcome Russia's participation, as we would the participation by the government of Iran, who also mentioned the fact that the ICC is not doing its job in Afghanistan. So when you look at the document, it actually provides a very comprehensive overview of what it is that we need to do, of the nature of the challenges that are being faced, and of how we all have an obligation to work together at a time when a message of solidarity with the women and the men of Afghanistan is critically important. There's an entire section on regional cooperation. Everyone recognizes that the tragedy of Afghanistan is that there is such an opportunity for Afghanistan to be a profitable, prosperous, engaged community, educated, globally oriented, regionally leading, and that the participation of partners in Central Asia, in Iran, in Pakistan, in India, to create that dream is possible. What's holding it back? I don't think an objective observer could say that what's holding it back is the fact that it's been the subject of such difficult violence over the last 20 or 30 years alone. I would say that's a factor, but it can't be the only factor. The one thing that the delegate from Russia did not mention in this document, the one thing he did not mention in his speech, is that alone of the 193 countries that are members of the United Nations, the provisional government of Afghanistan has decided that girls will not be allowed to go to school and that women will not be given the opportunity to work outside the home unless accompanied by somebody going in and out and all of the other requirements that they say are required. In particular, I would say, as a non-Muslim, no other Muslim country considers that to be a legitimate practice of Islam that I've heard. The representative of Iran talked very clearly just before me on this podium. Representatives from Pakistan, from Malaysia, from all over the world are all agreed. This is not some religious requirement. It is a political doctrine. It is a political doctrine that places women back deep several hundred years ago in time and refuses to allow women to participate fully in the life of their country. To say to a 12-year-old girl, your brother can go to school, you can't go to school. How can we accept that? How can we as an assembly say that's not a bad thing? The Russian Federation wouldn't stand for it. The women of the Russian Federation wouldn't stand for it for 1 second. And so I think we have an obligation, not just a choice, but I think we have an obligation to support this motion. And I would recommend everyone who has doubts as a result of what was told you was either in or not in the document, I would recommend that you read the document, because you got nothing to lose by reading it, and then decide yourselves whether this is some Western invention or some expression of imperialism. The equal rights of women is not an invention of any one country. It does not come from any one part of the world. The equality of women and the openness to the world is a decision that is made by every single country in this place when they join this organization. When you sign up to the Charter, this is what you sign up to. This is what the UN does. And whether those UN officials are coming from China or from Egypt or from Estonia or from any of the countries that are here today, they're not doing so in the name of Western imperialism. They're doing it in the name of humanity. And in the name of humanity, which we share, we cannot turn our backs on the women and on all the people of Afghanistan. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Canada. I will now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Poland.
Mr. President, Excellencies, Poland aligns itself with the statement made by the representative of the European Union and, as one of the co-sponsors, encourages all member states to vote in favor of the tabled resolution. We thank and congratulate Germany for its successful facilitation. Mr. President, over 14 months after the violent rise to power by Taliban, it is evident that the Afghan de facto authorities have failed to meet most of their commitments as regards sharing power with Afghan religious and ethnic minorities, protecting human rights, as well as preventing Afghanistan from becoming a safe haven for international terrorist groups. The lack of international recognition of the de facto government is a clear indication that the international community is not willing to resume diplomatic relations with a regime which is not representative of the whole population of Afghanistan and which does not respect basic human rights. Poland is particularly concerned about the dire humanitarian situation and the reluctance of the Taliban regime to render the political system more inclusive. We are also worried about continuing human rights restrictions and violation, including the institutionalized and systemic oppression of Afghan women. According to alarming reports by human rights mechanisms and civil society organizations, the human rights situation in Afghanistan is marked by a staggering extent of violation and abuses. Millions of Afghans need humanitarian assistance and are affected by the global food insecurity. Among them, women and children are, as it is usually the case, affected disproportionately. The systemic and systematic oppression of Afghan women causes our great concern. All aspects of women's and girls' lives are systematically deteriorating. Infringements on their freedom of movement, political and economic rights are compounded by growing discrimination and violence. But it's hard to add anything more to what my distinguished colleague from Canada just said from this rostrum a moment ago. Poland is especially concerned with the ban on attending secondary schools by Afghan girls. And such deprivation of access to education is not only a blatant violation of human rights of the affected individuals, but it's also a far-reaching detriment to the Afghan society as a whole. Poland is an active founding member of the Group of Friends of Women of Afghanistan, established in 2019 upon the initiative of the United Kingdom and Qatar. And together with our fellow members, we are fully committed to the same cause. We use this informal group to generate the political momentum and further the support to Afghan women and girls' full, equal, and meaningful enjoyment of their human rights. Mr. President, for all the above reasons, during the 51st session of the Human Rights Council, Poland and the other member states of the European Union facilitated a resolution on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan, which the Council adopted on October 7th, 2022. The aim of this resolution was, inter alia, to renew the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the human rights in Afghanistan and to strengthen it also in terms of human rights of children. The resolution firmly reiterated the call for an immediate end to all violation and abuses of the international human rights law and the violation of international humanitarian law in Afghanistan. Mr. President, it needs to be emphasized that the lack of rapprochement between Afghanistan and the international community holds back the process of restoring the much-needed economic and trade relations, as well as international development assistance. That, in turn, translates into missed opportunities in terms of enhancing regional connectivity and trade links in Central and South Asia, strengthening food and energy security, boosting economic growth, creating jobs, and securing the livelihood for the Afghan population, the livelihood they deserve. As far as the international engagement in Afghanistan is concerned, the United Nations has a critical role to play. Poland reaffirms its strong support for the UN leadership in peace, humanitarian, development, and human rights efforts in Afghanistan. We also welcome the appointment of Ms. Rosa Otunbayeva as the Secretary General's Special Representative for Afghanistan and the head of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, UNAMA. And we commend UNAMA's uninterrupted presence on the ground and all their efforts focused on the implementation of its political, humanitarian, and human rights mandate. And we express our appreciation to all United Nations personnel in Afghanistan for their unwavering commitment under extremely challenging conditions. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Poland, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Chile.
Señor Presidente, Mi país agradece al secretario general por el presente informe sobre la situación en Afganistán y el seguimiento a la implementación del mandato de la Misión de Asistencia de Naciones Unidas en Afganistán, que da cuenta del aumento de las necesidades humanitarias debido al severo declive económico y a la devastadora combinación de varios factores, a saber, décadas de conflicto, vulnerabilidad prolongada, los recientes terremotos y los peligros naturales recurrentes que afectan a unos 24 millones de personas, es decir, el 59% de la población estimada. Las violaciones a los derechos humanos de las mujeres y las niñas han aumentado a paso constante. A pesar de que las actuales autoridades de facto en un principio prometieron que las mujeres podrían ejercer sus derechos, que incluye el derecho a trabajar y a estudiar, han excluido sistemáticamente a las mujeres y las niñas de la vida pública. Chile observa con profunda preocupación que tras poco más de un año de que los talibanes tomaran el control de facto sobre Afganistán, el 15 de agosto del 2021, se continúen imponiendo severas restricciones a los derechos y libertades fundamentales de las mujeres y las niñas afganas, incluida la prohibición de cursar estudios de educación secundaria, lo que convierte a Afganistán en el único país que niega a las niñas el pleno derecho a la educación. De acuerdo al informe de UNAMA sobre la situación de los derechos humanos en Afganistán, que abarcaba el periodo de 10 meses transcurrido desde que los talibanes tomaron el poder el año 2021 y que fue publicado el 20 de julio, queda de manifiesto que las mujeres y las niñas afganas continúan siendo especialmente afectadas por la dispar aplicación de las directrices dictadas por parte de las autoridades de facto. En conjunto, estos decretos han creado un entorno restrictivo para las mujeres y las niñas en todas las facetas de la vida. Las restricciones en el movimiento y el cuerpo de las mujeres se siguen agravando. En mayo, los talibanes decretaron que las mujeres debían cubrirse la cara en público y les indicaron que debían quedarse en sus hogares, salvo en casos de necesidad. Se prohibió que las mujeres atravesaran grandes distancias sin un hombre acompañante. Y a las mujeres sin acompañantes cada vez se les niega más el acceso a servicios que son esenciales. En general, ha aumentado la vigilancia informal de la que son objeto las mujeres por parte de las familias, las comunidades y los empleadores, que a menudo actúan de esta forma por miedo a las posibles consecuencias de no adherirse a las directrices específicas relativas al género. Asimismo, el relator especial sobre la situación de derechos humanos consignó en su informe de septiembre pasado que organizaciones de derechos de los niños en Afganistán han denunciado un fuerte aumento en el matrimonio infantil debido al empeoramiento de las crisis económica y humanitaria y la falta de oportunidades educativas y profesionales para niñas y mujeres. Chile quiere agradecer a Alemania por su liderazgo como facilitador de la resolución sobre la situación de Afganistán y se suma al repudio e indignación sobre que estas medidas causan sobre la población en general y que en particular afectan a las mujeres y a las niñas. Décadas de progreso en igualdad de género y derechos de las mujeres desaparecieron en unos pocos meses. Quiero citar una conversación que sostuvo el relator especial sobre la situación de derechos humanos en Afganistán y que da cuenta de la desesperanza de millones de mujeres en Afganistán y que quedó plasmada en su último informe en el que relata un encuentro con una mujer en Kabul que le dijo, abro cita, las mujeres afganas saben lo que significa ser resilientes y fuertes. Hemos soportado dolor y penurias durante años durante el conflicto. Hemos enterrado a nuestros hijos e hijas. Pero el dolor y el miedo que sentimos hoy por nosotras y el futuro de nuestras hijas mientras nos sentimos olvidadas por la comunidad internacional, es aún un dolor mucho peor. Término de la cita. Las mujeres y niñas afganas deben saber que no están solas, que la comunidad internacional no las ha olvidado. Tenemos una obligación y una responsabilidad pendiente de defender sus derechos y amplificar sus voces. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
I thank the distinguished representative of Chile. I will now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates.
السيد الرئيس، أود بداية أن أضم صوت دولة الإمارات إلى البيان الذي ألقته المملكة العربية السعودية بالنيابة عن دول مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية، وأشكر وفد جمهورية ألمانيا الاتحادية على جهوده في تيسير المفاوضات على مشروع القرار المعنون الحالة في أفغانستان. السيد الرئيس، بعد مرور أكثر من عام على سيطرة الطالبان على كابول، لا تزال الحالة في أفغانستان مقلقة، خاصة مع تزايد الاحتياجات الإنسانية وانكماش الاقتصاد واستمرار التمييز ضد النساء والفتيات وحرمانهن من المشاركة الكاملة والهادفة والمتساوية في المجتمع. وتزداد الشواغل مع استمرار التهديدات التي تشكلها الجماعات الإرهابية في أفغانستان على الأمن والاستقرار فيها والمنطقة ككل، الأمر الذي يتطلب من المجتمع الدولي مواصلة دعواته بضرورة الحلول دون أن تصبح أفغانستان ملاذاً آمناً للإرهابيين، على أن تنخرط سلطات الأمر الواقع في حوار جاد وهادف مع المجتمع الدولي بشأن مكافحة الإرهاب وإحلال الأمن في أفغانستان. وعليه تؤكد دولة الإمارات على أهمية بذل كافة الجهود لإرساء الأمن في أفغانستان وتحقيق الاستقرار والتنمية فيها، بما يلبي آمال وتطلعات الشعب الأفغاني الصديق، إذ يجب هنا إبقاء قنوات الاتصال مفتوحة مع سلطات الأمر الواقع لاعتبارات واقعية وعملية، وبما يضمن إحراز تقدم ملموس. السيد الرئيس، تدعم بلادي الدعوات التي وجهها المجتمع الدولي لسلطات الأمر الواقع، بما في ذلك عبر مشروع قرار اليوم للتراجع عن السياسات والممارسات التي تقيد حقوق النساء والفتيات الأفغانيات. ونكرر أن هذه القيود تتنافى مع كافة الأديان والقيم والمبادئ الإنسانية، وأن مشاركة المرأة وحصول الفتيات على التعليم ليس أمراً اختيارياً، بل ضرورة لتحقيق التنمية والازدهار في أفغانستان. ومثلما أفاد برنامج الأمم المتحدة الإنمائي، خسر الاقتصاد الأفغاني ما يقرب من 5 مليار دولار في عام واحد فقط، وسيكون من الصعب استعادة تلك الخسارة إذ لم يسمح للمرأة بالمساهمة بشكل فعال في المجتمع وحصول الفتيات على حقهن في التعليم. ولا يسعنا سوى التأكيد على الدور الهام الذي تطلع به منظمة التعاون الإسلامي في هذا الجانب، فالقضايا المتعلقة بحقوق المرأة في أفغانستان لن تعالج دون الأخذ بعين الاعتبار السياقات الثقافية والدينية فيها. السيد الرئيس، تؤكد دولة الإمارات على أهمية تضافر الجهود الدولية لتقديم المساعدات الإنسانية والمبادرات الثقافية لبناء مستقبل أكثر استقراراً وازدهاراً للشعب الأفغاني. واستكمالاً لدورها التاريخي في دعم الجهود الدولية في أفغانستان ودعم الشعب الأفغاني، وقعت دولة الإمارات مؤخراً على مذكرة تفاهم مع اللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر لتقديم مساهمة قدرها 4 ملايين دولار أمريكي لتغطية النفقات التشغيلية والإدارية للمستشفيات في أفغانستان، فضلاً عن تقديم أكثر من 1,700,000,000 دولار من المساعدات وتسيير جسور جوية لإيصال الإمدادات الغذائية والطبية لتوفير الاحتياجات الضرورية للشعب الأفغاني وخاصة النساء والأطفال. كما لعبت دولة الإمارات دوراً مهماً وأساسياً في إجلاء نحو 50,000 شخص من الأفغان والرعايا الأجانب منذ شهر أغسطس من العام الماضي. وسنواصل التعاون مع الشركاء الإقليميين والمجتمع الدولي لتسهيل وصول المساعدات الإنسانية إلى الشعب الأفغاني. وأود أن أشير هنا إلى أن فداحة الأزمة الإنسانية تتطلب إعادة تنشيط الاقتصاد الأفغاني من خلال اتخاذ خطوات لزيادة السيولة وتسهيل المعاملات المالية والخدمات المصرفية بالتعاون مع المؤسسات المالية الدولية والجهات الفاعلة ذات الصلة لتخفيف القيود المفروضة على أفغانستان واتخاذ الترتيبات اللازمة لدعم تشغيل القطاع المالي. ولكن جميعنا يدرك بأن المساعدات الإنسانية ليست حلاً مستداماً، وبالتالي فإن تنشيط أجزاء من الاقتصاد الأفغاني سيقلل من الاحتياجات الإنسانية للشعب الأفغاني. السيد الرئيس، تعمل دولة الإمارات منذ بداية عضويتها في مجلس الأمن مع باقي أعضائه لتعزيز استجابة المجتمع الدولي للتحديات الخطيرة التي تواجهها أفغانستان وضمان اتباع نهج عملي وبناء لتحقيق هذه الغاية. لذا نتطلع إلى إيجاد طرق لمساندة بعثة يوناما بقيادة الممثلة الخاصة للأمين العام، بما في ذلك من خلال الحفاظ على التفويض القوي للبعثة خلال المفاوضات التي سيجريها المجلس في مارس المقبل. إذ تعد هذه المسألة ضرورية في ظل ما تلعبه يوناما من دور فاعل على أرض الواقع، وكذلك من حيث تنسيقها للجهود الدولية لتحسين أوضاع الشعب الأفغاني. وختاماً، تؤكد دولة الإمارات على التزامها بدعم الشعب الأفغاني والمشاركة بشكل بناء سواء في مجلس الأمن أو الجمعية العامة أو من خلال الترتيبات الإقليمية والدولية لتحسين الأوضاع في أفغانستان. شكراً السيد الرئيس.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Netherlands.
Thank you, Mr. President, and the Kingdom of the Netherlands aligns itself with the statement made earlier by the European delegation. Mr. President, let me start by expressing our appreciation to Germany for tabling this resolution. It is a balanced text, and it sends a clear message of support to the Afghan people. Since the last time we discussed this resolution here in this forum 2 years ago, the situation in Afghanistan obviously changed dramatically. The human rights situation, specifically for women and girls, has further deteriorated, as we heard clearly by the Special Rapporteur 2 weeks ago. Media are being shut down, tremendously limiting the access to information. The economy has shrunk. Millions of people are facing hunger this winter, again. And while security incidents have decreased, Islamic State and Al-Qaeda are very much present in Afghanistan today. Mr. President, the de facto authorities are not taking the necessary steps to be recognized as a responsible government by either the Afghan people or the international community. We see disappointingly little progress by the de facto authorities on important issues, such as the right to girls' education. Let me be clear, the plethora of challenges in Afghanistan cannot be solved without an inclusive government that represents all of the Afghan people. Mr. President, history shows us that isolating Afghanistan is not an option. Instability in Afghanistan will spill over in our interconnected world. It is key we keep Afghanistan on our minds and on our agendas. It is key that we continue to talk with people in Afghanistan on how to best support them. And it is key to continue to put pressure on the de facto authorities to do better, much better. Sustainable and lasting peace requires full respect for civil, political, economic, and cultural rights, as well as commitment towards inclusive and representative governance. The Kingdom of the Netherlands is therefore proud to co-sponsor this resolution today, and we would encourage all to vote in favor of it. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Netherlands. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait.
سعادة رئيس الدورة 77 للجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة، الأخوات والأخوة الزملاء، يطيب لي في البدء أن أعرب عن بالغ الشكر والتقدير لكم سعادة الرئيس لعقدكم هذه الجلسة الهامة تحت البند 34 من جدول أعمال الدورة 77 للجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة، المعنون الحالة في أفغانستان، والتي يأتي انعقادها اليوم بالتزامن مع ما تشهده الساحة الأفغانية من مستجدات وتطورات متسارعة، كما يضم وفد بلادي صوته للبيان الذي ألقاه سعادة المندوب الدائم للمملكة العربية السعودية بالنيابة عن دول مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية. بودي بداية سعادة الرئيس أن أسلط الضوء على بعض الجهود التي قامت بها دولة الكويت فيما يتعلق بالجانب السياسي وسير النشاط التفاوضي بين الأطراف المعنية، وكذلك الجانبين الإغاثي واللوجستي الخاص بعمليات الإجلاء، إذ قامت بلادي ومنذ 4 أغسطس 2021 وعلى مدار أسابيع عديدة بالعمل وبالتعاون مع دول متعددة على تنفيذ عمليات إجلاء لما يقارب 15,000 شخص من 32 جنسية مختلفة عبر أراضيها، وذلك لتسهيل عبور جميع الأشخاص وضمان وصولهم إلى وجهاتهم النهائية استشعاراً منها بإنسانية الأزمة. فيما يخص الجانب الإغاثي وانسجاماً مع إيمانها الراسخ نحو دعم العمل الإنساني بما يسهم في تعزيز مسار بناء السلام والأمن المجتمعي، فقد قامت دولة الكويت بتقديم مساعدات إنسانية للشعب الأفغاني الصديق بلغت قيمتها الإجمالية أكثر من 92 مليون دولار أمريكي، والتي كان آخرها الإعلان في الاجتماع رفيع المستوى لدعم الوضع الإنساني في أفغانستان المنعقد شهر مارس الماضي بدفع 10 مليون دولار أمريكي كمساهمة كويتية رسمية وشعبية، والتبرع كذلك بمبلغ 5 مليون دولار أمريكي إضافية من خلال وكالات الأمم المتحدة المتخصصة واللجنة الدولية للصليب الأحمر. ولا يفوتني هنا أن أشير إلى المساعدات الإغاثية الأساسية التي قامت مختلف المؤسسات والجمعيات الخيرية في دولة الكويت بإطلاقها إيماناً منها بأهمية مساندة الشعب الأفغاني والمساهمة كذلك بتوفير الاحتياجات الأساسية له. كما ستواصل دولة الكويت التنسيق والعمل الوثيق مع المنظمات الدولية المعنية بالعمل الإغاثي، خاصة مع دخول فصل الشتاء وما له من تداعيات على الوضعين الإنساني والغذائي في أفغانستان. أما بالنسبة للجانب السياسي وسير العملية التفاوضية، فقد أكدت دولة الكويت ولا تزال من خلال مشاركاتها المتعددة في الاجتماعات الإقليمية والدولية ذات الصلة بأهمية تلبية الاحتياجات الأساسية للشعب الأفغاني وتنفيذ البرامج التنموية لما لها من أثر واضح ومباشر في تحقيق الاستقرار والأمن الشامل. ولا يفوتني في الختام أن أجدد الشكر لكم سعادة الرئيس على عقدكم لهذه الجلسة، وأن أؤكد كذلك على تطلع دولة الكويت لمواصلة التعاون مع مختلف الجهات الإقليمية والدولية الخاصة بالنشاط الإنساني والمشاركة كذلك في الاجتماعات والجلسات الإقليمية والدولية ذات الصلة. وشكرا جزيلا.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kuwait. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Mr. President, allow me to begin by expressing our gratitude for convening this debate at this critical juncture for Afghanistan. We would also like to thank the delegation of Germany for its leading role in facilitating the consultations on the draft resolution. Japan is pleased to co-sponsor the draft resolution S/77L11. We believe the draft resolution comprehensively covers all the aspects of the challenges that Afghanistan faces. Although we take note of certain developments since the Taliban's takeover in August last year, namely security, anti-corruption measures, and humanitarian access, the Taliban is far from fulfilling the commitments it made to the Afghan people. There's much work to be done, including building an inclusive political system while listening to the voices of Afghan people, respecting the rights of all Afghans, including women, children, and minorities, and completely cutting ties with terrorism. Addressing these issues will benefit the Taliban themselves and is the best way to gain the trust of the international community and secure resources and assistance necessary to rebuild the country. We have been repeatedly emphasizing these points in our engagement with the Taliban. Japan has been standing by the Afghan people. Since the Taliban takeover in August 2021, Japan has been providing support for humanitarian and basic human needs in Afghanistan and neighboring countries, totaling $200 million. I would like to conclude by reiterating Japan's continued commitment to Afghanistan, particularly when Japan is taking the seat as an elected member of the Security Council starting from January. We will do our utmost to support the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Afghanistan and the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, UNAMA, in its work toward peace and stability of the country. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Japan. I now will give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland.
Mr. President, Ireland aligns with the statement of the European Union. We want to thank Germany for the draft resolution and their constructive facilitation of the text. Ireland, as a member of the core group, actively participated throughout the negotiations. Adoption by consensus of this resolution would reflect a significant recognition of the importance of speaking with one voice to the people of Afghanistan and to the Taliban. President, Ireland remains deeply concerned at the situation in Afghanistan. The violence, abuse, subjugation, and hunger suffered by millions of Afghans, greatly exacerbated by the Taliban's seizure of power, should trouble every member of this Assembly. Today's edicts banning women from Kabul's public parks and fun fairs are but the latest devastating example of the Taliban's disdain for Afghan women. This draft resolution reflects that deep concern at the human rights situation in Afghanistan, particularly those of women and girls and minorities. It further reiterates our collective commitment to the importance of inclusive, representative, and participatory government, one that includes the full, equal, meaningful, and safe participation of Afghan women. President, as winter approaches, the need to respond to Afghanistan's growing humanitarian crisis is all the more urgent. Sustained support from the international community remains vital, including as this resolution recognises critical humanitarian assistance and basic needs. President, as a member of the UN Security Council, Ireland has been steadfast in its support to the work of UNAMA and the UN country team in Afghanistan. Their work in support of the Afghan people against the Taliban's growing repression is more critical than ever. So too is the important work of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan, shedding light on the horrors being visited on the Afghan people. President, in closing, today's resolution is an important articulation of our responsibility as the international community to the Afghan people. Our responsibility to call out human rights abuses and violations, to insist on the upholding of the inalienable rights of the Afghan people. As we call on the members of this General Assembly to uphold that responsibility, we must also call on the Taliban to be accountable and to take responsibility for the suffering and challenges facing the Afghan people since their takeover by force of that country. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ireland. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Slovenia aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union and would like to add a few points in our national capacity. Allow me first to thank the German team for their efforts in facilitating the process leading to this resolution. This has a particular significance this year in reflecting the change in circumstances on the ground. I would also like to express Slovenia's strong support to the UN assistance mission in Afghanistan. It is important for UNAMA to maintain active presence in the country and for all actors in Afghanistan to ensure safe and secure environment for its work as mandated by the Security Council Resolution 2626 of 17th of March this year.
Among the issues that Slovenia remains extremely concerned about are challenging humanitarian situation and hardship that the population of Afghanistan is facing, that is worsened by increasing restrictions on human rights, especially those of women and of girls. All humanitarian operations need safe and unhindered access to the entire territory to provide urgent assistance to all those in need. Human rights situation in Afghanistan has worsened dramatically, in particular for women and girls. We call for full, equal and meaningful participation of women and girls in public life, the right to education, work and employment, access to health care and services, as well as the right to move, express and assemble. Mr. President, in the past year, Slovenia has contributed close to €500,000 for humanitarian needs of Afghan people through a number of international partners, UN funds and agencies, including UNFPA, UNHCR, WFP and ICRC. Slovenia has maintained a continuous presence in Afghanistan since 2014 through ITF, Enhancing Human Security, a humanitarian non-profit organization established by the government of the Republic of Slovenia. This organization has since carried out different projects, predominantly in the field of mine action, and despite complex circumstances on the ground has remained present in Afghanistan also after August 2021. Slovenia is an active donor also in the field of victims assistance and in the health sector through direct support to a mine detection center polyclinic in Kabul. Services of this clinic are free of charge and encompass the full spectrum of services ranging from physical health to psychosocial counseling for all segments of Afghan population. In October 2022, with the support of other donor countries, ITF started to implement a second victims assistance project aiming to provide emergency mobile physical rehabilitation and psychosocial support across Kabul, Kandahar and Nimorz provinces. Mr. President, in conclusion, we are convinced that the adoption of this resolution will provide an updated political, humanitarian and development framework for future dialogue with and on Afghanistan towards addressing the needs of Afghan people. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Slovenia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom.
Mr. President, the magnitude of the challenges the Afghan people are facing requires a resolute and unified response by the international community. Over 28 million people are in humanitarian need, and around 20 million people are acutely food insecure. If food assistance is not sustained, we risk the emergence of famine-like conditions. In recent months, some member states have attempted to exploit the crisis to score political points. They've tried to sow division where unity is required, and at the same time fail to contribute to the chronically underfunded UN humanitarian response plan. For our part, the UK disbursed $325 million in humanitarian and development assistance for Afghanistan last financial year, and we've committed a further $325 million this financial year. We're the second largest donor to the World Bank's Afghanistan Reconstruction Fund, and are leading efforts with the World Bank and others on economic stabilization. However, Afghanistan's problems will not be resolved unless the fundamental building blocks of stability are put in place. As a first step, this requires that the Taliban uphold rather than suppress human rights. The economic cost of women and girls' exclusion from political, economic, educational, and social spaces is stark. The human cost is starker still. The same is true of ethnic division. Inclusive governance and protection of minorities is vital for a stable and prosperous society. Yet we are gravely concerned at the risk of atrocity crimes, including against minorities such as the Hazara. The Special Rapporteur has warned of abuses with all the hallmarks of crimes against humanity. These must be investigated. And the Taliban must also play a direct role in stabilizing the economy. This includes ensuring transparency on revenue and the budget, as well as re-establishing an independent central bank with the right expertise. Mr. President, today's session provides the opportunity for member states to stand in solidarity with the Afghan people. But our solidarity is insufficient. We must continue to support economic stabilization while standing firm on holding the Taliban to its commitments, including on counter-terrorism and the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
主席先生，阿富汗是一个饱经沧桑坎坷的国家。随着去年外国部队从阿富汗仓促撤出，持续20年的阿富汗战争在混乱中收场。当前，阿富汗进入百废待兴、抚育创伤的新阶段，和平重建任重而道远。历史再次证明，军事干涉和外来模式行不通。阿富汗的前途命运必须掌握在阿富汗人民自己手中。各方不仅要把阿人主导、阿人所有挂在嘴边，更要放在心上，落到实处。我们要鼓励阿富汗当局搭建广泛包容的政治架构，根除恐怖主义滋生的土壤，探索符合阿富汗国情的治理模式。这注定是一个内生驱动、循序渐进的过程。国际社会要保持必要的耐心和合理期待。阿富汗人道和经济局势十分严峻，过半人口食不果腹，亟待人道援助，妇女儿童更是首当其冲的受害者。冬天即将到来，国际社会必须同时间赛跑，立即行动起来，帮助阿富汗人民度过寒冬，送去温暖和希望。阿富汗妇女和儿童接受教育、实现就业的权利应该得到保障。我们期待阿塔当局做出更多努力，回应国际社会关切。同时，人道援助不应政治化，不应和其他问题挂钩处理。主席先生，20年的战争虽然结束了，但影响仍在持续。阿富汗境内至今埋藏着1000万枚地雷，风险无处不在。外国部队遗弃大量武器装备，黑市交易泛滥。对外国驻军在阿罪行的调查和问责，阿富汗人民在等一个交代。对当前局势负有主要责任的国家，必须认真反思，及时纠错，采取切断发展援助、政治封锁孤立的做法，不能解决问题，反而会加剧阿富汗人民的苦难。阿富汗的海外资产是阿富汗的主权财产，是阿富汗人民的救命钱，理应立即全部归还给阿富汗，由阿富汗人民自主处置，用于改善民生和重建。这是阿富汗人民的普遍心声，是国际社会的广泛期待，也是公平正义的应有之义。主席先生，作为阿富汗邻国，中方一直积极支持阿富汗和平发展。过去1年，中国政府向阿富汗提供3亿元人民币的紧急援助，并积极落实10亿元人民币的双边援助。我们积极拓展同阿富汗的经贸合作，通过松子空中走廊从阿富汗进口1000余吨松子，帮助阿富汗民众 增加收入。从下个月1号起，中国将对来自阿富汗98%的税目产品实施零关税。这是我们以实际行动支持阿富汗人民创收增收、改善民生的又一重要举措。中方将继续同国际社会一道，继续以实际行动支持阿富汗参与区域合作与互联互通，释放地缘优势，早日实现稳定与繁荣。主席先生，大会即将就阿富汗问题决议草案采取行动。中方一直希望联大有关决议能够全面客观反映阿富汗局势，释放国际社会团结有力的信号，体现国际社会对阿富汗摆脱困境、改善民生、恢复发展的坚定的支持。遗憾的是，决议草案的内容有失平衡，特别是在解冻阿富汗海外资产、调查外国部队在阿富汗的罪行、关注在阿富汗遗留的武器的扩散风险等一系列重要而现实的问题上，联大的有关决议草案呢，不应视而不见。此外，区域组织在阿富汗问题上发挥着独特作用，一直为阿富汗和平稳定做出积极贡献。但个别会员国拒绝在决议中提及上海合作组织、吉安组织等涉阿富汗问题的重要地区组织。这份决议缺失了许多重要的内容。我们希望提案国以更加客观、公正的态度，平衡照顾各方合理关切，而不是一味偏袒个别国家的立场。中方将继续与各国一道，为阿富汗实现和平、稳定与发展做出更多贡献。谢谢你，主席先生。
I thank the distinguished representative of China. I now give the floor to the distinguished observer of the Sovereign Order of Malta.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies and distinguished colleagues, I think we would all agree that our educational opportunities have contributed to our being here today. The creativity and innovation that is rapidly shaping our planet for the better has all been exercised through education, and the remarkable capabilities of humans have all been nurtured by education. As a Catholic entity, the Sovereign Order of Malta views the acquisition of knowledge as a lifelong and life-wide enterprise. Reflective, self-directed learning and teaching provides conditions for teachers and students to interiorize knowledge. Therefore, it is no wonder why Benjamin Franklin famously said that investment in education pays the best interest. And that investment in education is also, as His Eminence Cardinal Parolin stated during the 77th General Assembly, one of the most effective ways of making our world and history more human. Despite this, the Secretary-General's report somberly confirms that the ban on secondary education for females makes Afghanistan the only country in the world to deny girls their full right to education. What's more, according to Save the Children, 27% of the Afghanistan youth are engaged in child labor instead of learning. Sustainable Development Goals 4 and 5 are clearly not being fulfilled in the country of Afghanistan. As the former Secretary-General Kofi Annan stated in 2003,
Study after study has taught us there is no tool for development more effective than the education of girls. If we are to succeed in our efforts to build a more healthy, peaceful, and equitable world, the classrooms of the world have to be full of girls as well as boys. Every year of schooling completed by them will be a step towards eradicating poverty and disease. The words fundamental human rights remain some of the most commonly used words within these walls. But why? It is because we are all witness to these fundamental human rights being denied to a distressingly large number of people across the world. Save the Children found that 19.7 million children and adults, almost 50% of the Afghanistan population, are going hungry, with 5 million children being one step away from famine. As well as this, 55% of the population continue to live in poverty. Combating this through our international relief agency, Malteser International, the Sovereign Order of Malta continues to provide urgent humanitarian aid to internationally displaced persons in and around Kabul and supports refugees through its teams in Pakistan, as urged by the United Nations a year ago. We have all come to accept that we are now at the tipping point of whether or not we will achieve the 2030 agenda, hence why this day, this week, and this year are so important for the future of our planet and for our people. Now, whilst some may believe that these goals are unattainable, we still have a choice. This choice is to either succeed or fail. The current geopolitical landscape, which is home to over 100 million forcibly displaced people, 27 ongoing conflicts, 13,000 nuclear warheads, and 690 million people living in extreme poverty, desperately needs every nation to fully harness the themes of the 77th General Assembly: solidarity, science, technology. If we are serious about creating a sustainable future where no one is left behind, then action-orientated responses, accountability, and global transparency are all tools that we need to continue to implement across every aspect of the United Nations and within our own domestic policies. The Sovereign Order of Malta strongly affirms its belief in the right to education as one of the most powerful solutions in creating a sustainable future, and is greatly distressed by the findings from within Afghanistan. With this, I would like to echo the words of yet another former Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, when he noted, "Education is a fundamental right and the basis for progress in every country. Prosperous countries depend on skilled and educated workers." The challenges of conquering poverty, combating climate change, and achieving truly sustainable development in the coming decades compel us to work together. With partnership, leadership, and wise investments in education, we can transform individual lives, national economies, and our world. The Sovereign Order of Malta commends the steps taken by the United Nations to implement the UN assistance mission in Afghanistan. This truly is a positive and reliable means of offering insight into ongoing developments from within. Steps like these need to continue to be proposed, to be encouraged, and implemented by the international community. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished observer of the Sovereign Order of Malta. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation on a point of order.
Благодарю, господин председатель. В связи с грубыми ошибками, допущенными при переводе финальной части нашего выступления на английский язык, я вынуждена взять слово снова. Надеюсь, мое дополнительное заявление будет переведено верно. Вызывает глубокое сожаление, что из-за заранее ангажированной позиции в пользу западной группы стран и демонстративного игнорирования предложений, поддержанных региональными государствами, документ получился несбалансированным. Здесь также добавлю, после 20 лет военной кампании Афганистан находится в тяжелейшем положении, когда женщины не только не могут работать или учиться, но вынуждены продавать свои органы и детей для того, чтобы прокормить свои семьи. В этих условиях замалчивание ответственности, которую Запад несет за происходящее, и отказ рассматривать реальные шаги по изменению ситуации, прежде всего по разморозке активов, это безответственно. В этой связи мы вынуждены поставить резолюцию на голосование. Мы подчеркиваем, что, несмотря на сложившуюся с резолюцией ситуацию, мы по-прежнему поддерживаем Афганистан и его народ в этот важный для него период. И наше голосование следует трактовать не иначе, как неодобрение действий и методов работы неформальных кураторов досье. Я благодарю за внимание.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. We have heard the last speaker in the debate of this item. The Assembly will now take a decision on draft resolution A/77/L11 entitled The Situation in Afghanistan. For your information, the draft resolution has closed for co-sponsorship. I will now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat.
Mr. President, I should like to announce that since the submission of the draft resolution, and in addition to those delegations listed on the L document, the following countries have also become co-sponsors of A/77/L11. Andorra, Australia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Croatia, Dominican Republic, Finland, Hungary, Japan, Kuwait, Latvia, Liechtenstein, Lithuania, Monaco, Mongolia, Montenegro, New Zealand, North Macedonia, Palau, Poland, Portugal, Republic of Korea, Romania, San Marino, Saudi Arabia, Slovakia, Switzerland, Tajikistan, Thailand, Turkey, Ukraine, and Vanuatu. If any other countries wish to co-sponsor A/77/L11, please signify by pressing the microphone button. I see none. Thank you, Mr. President.
So a recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft resolution A/77/L11, please signify. Those against, abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft resolution A/77/L11 entitled The Situation in Afghanistan. Will all delegations confirm that the votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 116. Against, 0. Abstention, 10. Draft resolution A/77/L11 is adopted. Before giving the floor for explanation of vote after the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pakistan abstained in the vote on the resolution on Afghanistan contained in document A/77/L.11. We have participated actively in the informal consultations and appreciate that some of our suggestions were accommodated by Germany and the co-sponsors. We welcome the acknowledgement of Pakistan's role in hosting Afghan refugees and facilitating evacuations from Afghanistan, recognition of the threats to Afghanistan's immediate neighbors, the call on Afghanistan to take concrete steps against all terrorist organizations, the caution expressed against attempts to derail peace and stability in Afghanistan, the need for sustained engagement of the international community with Afghanistan, the importance of regional connectivity projects and acknowledgement of the general amnesty measures and the ban on opium cultivation announced by Afghanistan. Pakistan welcomes the resolution's call for commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Afghanistan and the need to overcome the security challenges. We also endorse the expressed desire to ensure the protection of human rights, including the rights of women and girls, promote inclusive governance, and eliminate terrorism within and from Afghanistan. Nevertheless, the resolution remains unbalanced and in several respects unrealistic. It does not acknowledge that there is a de facto new government in Afghanistan. It does not delineate any process to promote normalization in Afghanistan through a process of engagement with the de facto government. There is no commitment to unfreeze Afghanistan's national reserves and no commitment to help Afghanistan's economic recovery beyond humanitarian assistance. In particular, Pakistan is disappointed that one delegation was allowed to block references to the specific mention of terrorist organizations, including the TTP, as well as references to the role and contributions of the OIC to peace and stability in Afghanistan. Therefore, we do not consider this resolution's provisions as sufficiently comprehensive or realistic as a framework for promoting the objectives of peace, security, development, and human rights in Afghanistan. For these reasons, and while acknowledging the efforts of the co-sponsors, my delegation has been constrained to abstain in the vote on this resolution. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Pakistan. We have heard the last speaker an explanation of vote after the vote. May I take it that it is the wish of the General Assembly to conclude its consideration of agenda item 34? It is so decided. The meeting is adjourned.